Back in 2017, I had moved to a smaller town in rural Illinois, and I only knew one person in town. I'm a bit of an introvert, so I had a hard time making friends, especially being single and in my early 20s living in a town filled with a population that was mostly retired. My friend, who I'll call Clara, introduced me to an older couple that were maybe in their early 50s and were looking for a dog sitter. She thought it would be a good way for me to make some connections while living there. We had made time to meet at their house so I could see the lay of the land and meet the dogs. The home was a 70s brick ranch style, severely outdated and slightly falling apart in some places. I explored abandoned houses for fun, so I didn't mind. The dogs were sweet, but as for the couple, they were odd. They were friendly enough, but while I'd be speaking to them, instead of making eye contact, they'd be doing more of a full body scan as if sizing me up. They would also guide me to rooms and not really say anything on the tour, just open the doors and let me look and then close them. I should also mention they sell firearms out of their home as a side business, which I didn't really mind, but they had cameras everywhere. Outside and in, hallways, living room, kitchen, office, garage, backyard, driveway, kitchen table, etc. They told me it was just for insurance purposes due to their business. It made me a little uncomfortable, but I was just really hoping to make some sort of connection in this town and some money. Then the time came for me to come and watch the dogs. They'd been gone for a week and I'd been working from home, so I made myself comfortable. I set up my workspace in their office, which had a monitor that had cameras outside displayed so I could see all around the house, which was kind of nice because I felt a little at ease being alone on a decent-sized property in the middle of nowhere. I should also note, the dogs had a doggy door so they could go outside 24/7, and the house backed up to the woods. First night was fine. Second night, I noticed one of the cameras went offline that watched the driveway. I didn't think much of it, as Wi-Fi out in rural areas is finicky, but I still went and checked just in case maybe the camera fell or something. As I walked to the door, I heard the dogs get off the ground and scramble frantically to run out the doggy door and start barking like crazy. Mind you, it's about 10 at night, so I got freaked out and wanted to get the dogs to come back inside. So I made my way to the back door and noticed the dogs were both barking like crazy at the same spot at the part of the fence that backs up to the woods. I didn't see anything, but I'd seen enough horror movies to where I was starting to psych myself out and I had to find a way to calm down and get the dogs in. So treats it was. I got them back in and blocked off the doggy door with a chair that weighed a decent amount and called it a night. Next morning, I woke up late and threw myself off and had to start working before I could feed the dogs. But then I noticed they weren't at the front of the bed anymore. The house was quiet. I got up and called their names and they didn't respond. So I walked to the back door and they were in the yard just doing their thing. Then it hit me. How did they get outside when I blocked the door? My heart sank and I felt all the blood rush from my head as I turned to my right to see the chair that I had pushed in front of the doggy door now was sitting in the corner of the room. Panic set in immediately, and I called my friend Clara to explain the situation and that I needed her to come here ASAP to do a walkthrough of the house with me because I just knew there was no way the dogs could move that chair 5+ feet. She came over about 20 minutes later, and I made a beeline for the front door and let her in. We both went room by room and couldn't find anything or anyone. It just didn't make any sense. She tried to reassure me that maybe I didn't have it pushed over as much as I thought I did. I figured I'd just accept it for what it was and just push through on overly high alert for the next 4 days. Clara left and I went back to work. The day was fine and quiet, and I began to relax again. I finished making dinner and decided to get some work done. I sat down in the office and just happened to turn to look at the monitor with the camera views on it and noticed all of them were offline. My stomach dropped. I knew one going out was possible, but all 4? That was just too coincidental. Due to the nature of the business the couple ran, I texted them to let them know their cameras were down and if they wanted me to try and troubleshoot it for them, I'd be happy to. Also because I didn't like not having eyes on the outside of this place. A couple hours went by and no response. They're on vacation after all, so I just figured I'd have to let it go and suck it up until they get back to me. It was late, close to midnight, when I finally settled in and was watching TV to fill the void of silence that surrounded me when I heard the dogs get up and scramble to the doggy door again. I shot up and out of bed, my heart pounding out of my chest because I knew something was wrong. I grabbed the knife I had sitting next to the bed and walked to the back door looking out into the yard and couldn't see anything. The dogs had already stopped barking and were now just sniffing along the fence. I did that whisper yell to get them to come back in when I heard a thump come from the other side of the house. Frozen, I had to make a decision fast. Try to get the dogs in, or investigate whatever the hell just fell. I got the dogs in just in case it was some animal they were after. I didn't want them to get skunk sprayed or something. They wandered into the living room and hopped on the couches, and I slid the chair back in front of the door. I took a picture with my phone this time just so I could reassure myself I did it. I made my way to the back room where I heard the thump noise, and I immediately froze. I'm not sure if anyone else can understand, but when there's a presence in the room, there's almost this small difference in the atmosphere. There's a white noise, not breathing or movement, just a break in the stagnance of the silence. Well, regardless if you don't, I felt it. I wasn't going to be that person that kept seeking out the exact area of where this was coming from, so I asked, "Who's there? What are you doing here?" Silence. I then called out the names of the couple that lived there to see if for some wild reason they were in their own home at midnight when they weren't supposed to be, but again met with silence. Clara has a kid and husband, so I didn't want to bother her, so I figured the next thing I would do was call the police. But then I felt that wash of embarrassment in case it was nothing. They'd think I'm an idiot. I stepped back into the hallway that led to the room and slowly closed the door as quiet as possible and locked the door. I went and sat in the living room with the dogs with my phone in one hand and knife in the other. I couldn't make a decision on what to do. About 20 minutes went by and I received a text from the wife saying, "Hi, don't worry about the cameras, you're safe." I was thrown off because they were in Florida and it was almost 2 in the morning there. And also, what do you mean I'm safe? I didn't even mention safety being the issue. I was getting ready to give a general "sounds good" text when I got another text from the wife. It read, "Also, can you make sure that I didn't leave the garage door open to the inside? I don't want anything getting in. The door she's mentioning is in that back room." I didn't want to go back in there for obvious reasons, so I just didn't respond and pretended like I was asleep and couldn't. 2 minutes later, she texted again, "Hi, I know it's late, but can you please check on this for me, as I'm worried." My gut was screaming no, but maybe the noise was a wild animal that got in. I didn't respond, but got up to go check, knife and phone in hand still. As I approached the door, I heard a shuffle from the back room. I stopped and stood there silent to see if I heard anything else before I opened the door. My phone lit up, and she texted me, "I see you're up. Can you please go in and check?" I couldn't move. I forgot they had cameras in the hallway and in the living room. Why were they pushing this at 1 in the morning? Now knowing I was being watched, reluctantly, I slowly unlocked the door and opened it with my arms stretched as far as I could to get an open view of the room from as far as possible. I didn't hear anything or see anything, so I took a couple steps into the room and saw the door to the garage was in fact open. It was so damn dark in there, I didn't want to get any closer, but I had to do it and just get this over with. I approached the door, and a light appeared from my phone as I had gotten a notification, and the faint light from my phone lit a portion of the garage doorway I was about 2 steps from, when I noticed the outline of an arm pressed against the wall right next to the door. Fight or flight kicked in immediately. I turned and ran back through the doorway and slammed the door to the back room shut and locked it. I grabbed my keys off the kitchen counter and ran out the front door. I fumbled with the keys as I was shaking and panting, and I got the door unlocked when I noticed the garage door was opening and halfway up. I started my car, and as the headlights lit up the now open garage, I saw in the back corner a grown man in a jacket squatting behind a box right next to the door I was going to close. I didn't waste time and floored it in reverse down the driveway and drove immediately to the police station. I was crying and explained what happened, and they said they'd send a unit to check out the house. I sat in my car at the police station texting the wife about what just happened, seeing as they had access to the cameras and could maybe see if someone was in there. No response. About a half hour later, the police officer came back to the station and let me know the garage door was open, but the house was clear and there was no signs of a break-in. They even checked around the perimeter of the yard and nothing was out of the ordinary. They knew I was scared out of my mind, so they offered to follow me back and do another check with me there. After it was done and I saw with my own eyes no one was there, they left. I couldn't sleep. It was going on almost 3 or 4 in the morning at this point, so I just laid on the couch by the dogs, wide awake, gripping the kitchen knife. About 20 minutes after the officer left, I got a text from the wife. "Hi, plans changed. We'll be home soon. You can go home now." The complete disregard for the situation that just unfolded that I texted her about. The letting me know you're coming home 4 days early and didn't mention it, and will be here just hours after all of this? I didn't dwell on the moment. I grabbed my stuff and left. Their home is on a rural road, but only about a quarter mile from the main street. As I got halfway to the stop sign and looked in my rearview mirror, I saw a car with no headlights on pull into their driveway. I texted the wife and said, "Someone just pulled into your driveway as I was leaving." Almost instantly, I got a text back that read, "I know." Chills ran down my spine. They were setting me up. They'd been in the area that whole time. The dogs barking in the middle of the night were probably alerting me that they had been driving on the path behind the house. They shut the cameras off so I couldn't see their creeping movements on the property while I was right there inside, oblivious. I never heard from them again. My friend profusely apologized, saying she had no idea how weird they were and that she'd only known them as coming into the local diner every now and then. She said after that incident they never came in again. I'm 30 now, and I still have trouble with the entire situation. I know I'm okay and I'm safe, but knowing I was just seconds away from God knows what is a feeling I can't seem to shake, and not sure if I ever will be able to. I work as a bartender at a bar and restaurant in a suburb just outside Baltimore. I'll do my best to explain the layout so the story makes sense. It's a busy place with a unique setup. There are no waiters, just bartenders like me and the cooks in the back. If you want to find food or non-alcoholic drinks, you have to order them at the bar, and when everything's ready, you grab it from the counter. I'm not sure why things are done that way, but I guess it had something to do with management being cheap and trying to avoid hiring waiters. Either way, it keeps things fast-paced, which I actually like. For whatever reason, the place is really popular, even though I personally don't think it's anything super special. The atmosphere is lively most nights, with great music, a buzzing crowd, and a standing area near the DJ booth where people gather to dance and chat. The constant flow of customers and the high-energy vibe make the job fly by. I love meeting and talking to new people, so the gig is perfect for me. I would probably lose my mind if I had to wait long periods of time between serving guests, but that's just me. I bet some people are the opposite. That particular night started off like any other. It was a weekend, so things were going to be super busy. I was ready. After a certain time, the bar started filling up with people. It looked like more of a younger college crowd that night, which meant more dancing, more spilling, and a rowdier environment in general. Oh yeah, and worse tips, which kind of sucked for me. This one group of kids just kept on ordering round after round of tequila shots faster than I could line up the salt and limes. It's always chaos when they take over the bar. One of them was so plastered he used the same pickup line on me like 3 times. I was running around doing my thing when I noticed an elderly couple walk in and sit down at the booth in the corner of the restaurant. At first glance, there was nothing strange about them. I just thought it was interesting that 2 people that age would want to come into a rowdy place like this. I didn't have too much time to think about it though, so I went back to work. Fast forward maybe 30 minutes to an hour. I was halfway through pouring a line of gin and tonics when I noticed the couple again. My hands kept working, muscle memory taking over, but my brain was stuck on them for some reason. That's when it hit me. They were just sitting there motionlessly. They hadn't ordered anything either. No food and definitely not any drinks I would have remembered. I looked a little closer and realized that they weren't even looking at each other. They were both fixated at the wall next to them. From what I could tell, it didn't look like they were talking either. It was the strangest thing. I was beyond curious, but the bar was slammed, and I had too much to do to spend time wondering about it. I figured they might be waiting for someone, or didn't realize how the place worked. Maybe they were waiting for a waiter to take their order. When I finally had a break, I decided to check on them myself. I walked over to the table and put on my most polite smile. As I approached, neither of them turned to face me. They were both still staring at the wall like statues. I cleared my throat and asked them if they wanted anything to eat or drink. The woman didn't even flinch. She kept staring at the wall like I hadn't spoken at all. The man turned his head slowly, like he was moving in slow motion. When his face came into view, I felt a chill run through me. His skin was pale and wrinkled, and his eyes were almost sunken into his face completely. He didn't speak, just stared at me and shook his head once, firmly but silently. Something about the way he looked at me made my stomach twist. I muttered something in response and quickly returned to the bar. I had the weirdest feeling in my gut after that. Those people looked like they didn't even belong in this century, let alone this bar. I didn't look over at that booth for a long time. Eventually, things started to die down a little, and I remembered the couple. I glanced over impulsively, and I nearly dropped the glass I was holding. Both of them were staring directly at me now. I made direct eye contact with the woman, but she never averted her gaze. I don't think I'd ever been more uncomfortable at my job than I was in that moment. I looked away and pretended to be busy, trying not to freak out completely. By the time I glanced back again, the booth was empty. I was relieved. I was just glad that they were gone, as mean as that sounds. By the end of the night, I was still thinking about the whole thing. As I wiped down the bar and closed up with my coworker Karen, I decided to ask her if she saw anything strange. She's, I guess, what you would call a vet. She's been working there for years and prides herself on noticing everything and everyone that comes through the doors. When I asked her about the couple, she gave me a confused look and said she didn't know what I was talking about. I looked at her blankly and told her I was talking about the elderly couple that was sitting in the corner booth. She shook her head and told me she didn't remember seeing anyone like that. She then jokingly asked me if I was hallucinating, which got a playful laugh out of me, but on the inside though, I was losing it. I knew what I had seen. I asked her if she was sure, and she crossed her arms before listing at least 10 random people who had ordered food that night and what they were wearing. I laughed again and complimented her memory, but like I said before, I was dying on the inside. By the time we locked up, I started doubting myself. As I walked to my car, I noticed something that made me nearly drop my keys in fear. Across the street, there were 2 dark figures standing under a lone streetlight. I knew it was them. I wanted to scream, but the sound wouldn't come. I didn't wait another second. I jumped into my car, locked the doors, and sped out of the lot without another look. The drive home was awful. I was trying not to break down the whole time. I just kept repeating, "Oh my God," over and over. I had so many questions. Had Karen somehow missed them? Were those people even real? Was I going insane? I couldn't explain it. I thought I was going crazy. I wish this story had a resolved ending, but it doesn't. I never saw those people again. I never got any kind of explanation. I don't think I ever will. I apologize in advance if I mess up any details about the story I'm about to tell. This is something that my best friend told me multiple times several years ago now. It's one of those stories so unsettling you can't shake it even after hearing it more than once. My friend's dad was a logger, specifically a tree saw operator. For those who don't know, a tree saw is a massive machine capable of cutting down giant trees and slicing them to specific lengths. His job meant long, grueling hours, often alone in the deep, secluded forests of the Pacific Northwest. The way his logging crew worked, he was paid based on the number of trees he cut down rather than the hours he worked, so he would often push himself to work 16 to 20-hour days to finish jobs as quickly as possible. After he and his coworker finished their part, the rest of the crew would come in to clear the felled trees and transport them to the mill. While he spent about half of his time working alone, the other half was spent with his friend Griffin, another tree saw operator. They used radios to communicate, especially when they worked on opposite ends of the same job site. A number of years ago, my friend's dad and Griffin were assigned to a remote job site high up on a mountain. It took the company over 3 weeks just to clear a road wide enough for their trucks and equipment to make it to the site. By the time they began work, they were positioned in an extremely desolate part of the mountain. They were already 10 days in, making good progress, when they started hearing strange chatter over their radios. At first the voices were muffled, just faint, static-laden murmurs that didn't make sense. They tried switching channels, but no matter what they did, the chatter followed them. Anyone who's used a standard radio knows how strange that is. It should be impossible for anyone to follow you when you're switching channels. As they progressed farther up the mountain, the voices became more distinct. They couldn't hear full conversations, but based on what they could hear, they both agreed that the tone of the conversation fragments felt off. My friend's dad said it sounded almost casual at times, but the content was unintelligible. They also started finding strange signs that people had been there before them: random containers, footprints in the dirt, and small makeshift campsites. Like I said before, they were in a place so remote it was practically inaccessible, so these discoveries were deeply unsettling. No one should have been up there. One day, Griffin came across a tent hidden just off a trail and called my friend's dad over. They decided to investigate. Inside, they found a single sleeping bag and a duffel bag filled with the most disturbing things imaginable: multiple pairs of children's underwear, duct tape, rope, and crude sketches of children being molested. There were even photos of a fresh apple indicating whoever owned it had been there recently. Griffin wanted to pack up and leave immediately. My friend's dad, ever the workaholic, insisted they finish the job. They agreed to limit radio communication to emergencies only and decided to keep working. That night, they sat in the camper, unable to shake the dread that hung over them. The radio crackled to life again, and this time they could make out snippets of a conversation between two men. They were talking about mundane things, collecting water and firewood, but the realization that these men were likely connected to the tent freaked my friend's dad out. Griffin wasn't as fazed, but my friend's dad was losing it. The next night, my friend's dad decided to confront them. When he heard the men talking about gathering bush for a fire, he grabbed the radio and demanded to know who they were and what they were doing there. The radio went silent immediately, and the men didn't respond. That silence was almost more unnerving than the chatter. Griffin was upset that my friend's dad had announced their presence, and the two of them got into a brief argument before deciding they'd escalate the situation the next day. Around midnight, Griffin shook my friend's dad awake, whispering that someone was outside the camper. The first thing he noticed was the soft sound of footsteps crunching on the gravel outside. Heart pounding, he fumbled for his gun, only to realize it wasn't loaded. He had no idea where his ammunition was. Griffin was unarmed, and the idea of calling the police was laughable given their location. They both sat frozen as they heard the camper door handle jiggle. The door creaked open, but didn't fully swing inward. Their camper was high off the ground, and there was no ladder or stool to climb up. Then came the scratching. Long, deliberate scratches along the outside of the door. 4 agonizing minutes passed. Finally, my friend's dad nodded at Griffin, signaling he was going to check it out. He moved quietly toward the door, gripping a flashlight in his shaking hand. Just as he reached the door, it burst open, and he was struck across the face with a knife. His pain was blinding. He fell out of the camper, hitting the ground hard. Before he could recover, a man was on top of him, pressing the knife against his neck. Another man appeared, kicking him repeatedly in the head. Griffin, without hesitation, leapt out of the camper and tackled the man with a knife. The second man bolted into the darkness, and the one Griffin had tackled scrambled to his feet and followed. They disappeared into the forest. Griffin helped my dad's friend back into the truck, and they drove 2 hours to the nearest hospital. It was bad. His face was a bloody mess, and there was a cut across his eye so severe it permanently damaged his vision. They reported the attack to the police, but nothing came of it. 2 weeks later, as the rest of the logging crew finished the job, one of their coworkers was found bound, gagged, raped, and murdered in a ditch. No arrests were ever made. To this day, my friend's dad struggles with PTSD. His right eye, with its disfigured pupil, constantly reminds him of that night. I'm sure he hasn't had a full night of restful sleep since. I've been terrified of deep woods for a long time now, mostly because of my friend's dad's experience. I haven't heard from my friend or his dad in years now, so I can only hope he's doing all right. This happened last summer. I was 20 years old. My name is Kevin. My friend James comes from a very wealthy family. His dad is like an IP lawyer who contracts with the US government or something. They've got a bunch of properties all over the country and a handful of international ones too. That's the kind of wealth I'm talking about. One of their houses is on a relatively large but overall pretty secluded lake. The lake itself isn't so big that you can't see the houses on the other side of it, but it would be a workout and a half swimming across the whole thing. James' parents were never around, so he pretty much had unlimited access to that house, and he often invited friends over, with permission of course. There's something about being out on the lake that makes you feel invincible. It's a different feeling than the beach for sure. I'm not really sure how to explain it, but there's more of an exclusive vibe to it. Hopefully I can be successful enough to afford one day. Like I said, the lake itself is pretty secluded. Big fancy houses line the perimeter, but most of them would usually sit dark and empty. A lot of them were vacation homes for people who barely even used them. It's honestly kind of a shame thinking about it. There are upsides to that though. James would throw the craziest parties there because there were usually no neighbors to call the police. This night was different though. It was just the two of us, having a more chill night. I won't get into it, but I had just broken up with my girlfriend of 3 years and I was in dire need of some bro time. We were having a few beers out on the dock when I noticed a light flicking across the lake. I can't remember exactly what time it was. At first, I thought it was just the sun perfectly reflecting off something into my eye, but even when I moved my head to the side, I could still see it. It was flashing like someone was turning a light on and off repeatedly. I told James, and the two of us became fixed on it, trying to figure out what it could be. At some point, we realized the flashing wasn't random. It was following a pattern. 3 short bursts, followed by 3 longer ones, followed by 3 short ones. I guess I'm dumb for not knowing this, but James snapped his fingers and said it was Morse code. I looked at him like he was crazy and asked him when in the world he had learned Morse code. He told me he didn't actually know it, but he knew what 3 short, 3 long, 3 short meant. SOS. I called BS and pulled out my phone, but to my surprise, he was actually right. Like I said, maybe I'm dumb for not knowing that, but I'm not really one for obscure knowledge anyway. The flashing continued for another minute or so, following that same pattern, before stopping abruptly. The two of us had just been staring at it the whole time. I really didn't know what to think. It could have been a joke, but there was always that chance that someone was actually in trouble. James immediately suggested calling the cops, but I reminded him that we'd been drinking and we weren't legal yet. I was honestly fighting a DUI charge at the time, so the last thing I needed was another run-in with the police. He wasn't thrilled about that answer, and I could tell he was torn about the situation. The two of us couldn't really think of a rational explanation besides a kidnapping or something along those lines. We thought it might have been someone who had fallen and needed help, but that didn't make any sense because they probably would have just called the police. We've always been those adventurous, delinquent type guys, so we decided it was worth checking out ourselves. If it turned out to be serious, we'd call the police then. We went back inside. James' brother had a bunch of switchblades lying around his room. He was kind of a weird kid. So we grabbed a few of them just for peace of mind. James said he was good to drive, and that we should drive around the lake to that house, but I told him I really wasn't comfortable with that, for obvious reasons. He joked about my situation, and I laughed it off. If we weren't driving, there was only really one other option. The two of us walked back out to the yard, and dragged James' dad's kayak into the water. We were laughing at first, enjoying the adventure of it all, but the further out we got onto the lake, the quieter we got. I think both of us realized how dumb of an idea it was, but neither of us wanted to be the one to spoil the fun. The sun had almost fully set at that point, and it was getting harder to see. It wasn't pitch black or anything. We had light from some of the lake houses to guide us, but it was still a bit unsettling. As we got closer, the house came into view. It was big like the others, but it was obviously not maintained very well. For starters, the dock was half collapsed, literally. Half of it was just sunken into the water. The flashing had also stopped, which was kind of a bad sign too. We had planned on just tying the kayak to the dock, but we obviously couldn't do that anymore given how unstable it looked. Luckily, the yard wasn't too high up above the water, so we beached the kayak on the yard instead, careful not to slip on the rocks. I felt the adrenaline rush start coming on. I could tell James was feeling the same thing. We looked up toward the house. The light had been coming from the second floor, that much we knew. James was freaking out at that point and insisted that we just leave and call the police. I told him we'd have to kayak all the way back to his house to even do that, as there was no service on the lake and that we need to connect to Wi-Fi. I reminded him that we had explored 1,000,000 abandoned buildings before, and this wasn't too different. He wasn't thrilled with that logic, but agreed anyway. Believe me, I know how dumb this was. Everyone I talk to about this shares that same opinion, but I've never been one to make good decisions, and neither is James. We didn't walk to the front door. That would have been suicide. Instead, we crept around the house until we found a window that was unlocked. The two of us silently slipped inside. The house was empty. Not just abandoned, but empty. Like stripped. There was no furniture and no junk in there either. To be frank, there was no signs that anyone had ever even lived there. The floors and walls were completely bare. We moved cautiously through the rooms, looking for the stairs. There was no one in sight, and all the rooms were just as empty as the first one had been. We finally found the stairs and slowly made our way up. I had made a mental note of where the window was, and we slowly walked down one of the hallways until we got to what I guessed was the room the light had been coming from. I pressed my ear against the door and heard nothing. I glanced over at James. He nodded, and I carefully pushed the door open. The room was empty, with the exception of one thing by the window. I tiptoed over to it and realized what it was. It was one of those old projectors, and it was facing the window. Alarm bells immediately started going off in my head. This was a trap. Someone had set this up deliberately. James must have realized the same thing, because I just heard him start sprinting back the way we had came, not even trying to be quiet. I turned without another thought and followed him. As we were running down the stairs, I heard a door, presumably a closet door, swing open from the room I had just been in, followed by rapid thumping sounds. We bolted down the stairs and back through the house to that first window. James jumped through and I was next. As I was climbing through, I heard those footsteps from behind me again, bounding down the stairs. I didn't even look. I just made it through the window and ran to catch up with James, who was already down by the lake's edge. As I was running to catch up to him, I heard him curse, and I quickly realized why. The kayak was gone. I turned, and from the side of the house, there was a person running toward us. I could barely process what I was seeing. He was fast. I couldn't get a good look at him, but he was big, definitely an adult. I pulled out my switchblade, ready to defend myself. I expected James to do the same, but instead, he turned and jumped straight into the lake. Sneakers, hoodie, everything. I didn't even think, I just followed. The water was freezing, but I didn't care. I swam as fast as I could, trying to fight the burning sensation in my arms and legs. We swam toward the light from James' house, which looked like it was miles away. The swim felt endless, but on pure adrenaline, we made it. By the time we dragged ourselves onto James' dock, I thought I had hypothermia. I don't think I've ever been that cold in my life. We ran straight inside, locked every door, and called the police. It took them almost an hour to show up. It was honestly kind of outrageous. When they finally did, they went straight across the lake to investigate. They were over there for a while, but when they came back, they told us exactly what I expected to hear, that there was no one. They confirmed this house had been abandoned for years. No signs of recent occupancy, no footprints, no gear, no personal belongings, nothing. Just an empty house. They weren't happy with us. They gave us the whole "why didn't you call first" speech. James's parents were even more pissed when they found out. Let's just say I wasn't invited back to the lake house after that. James told me his parents were threatening to sue the town for allowing something like that to happen, and the police for refusing to investigate further. As for me, I still don't know what happened that night. I don't know who was in that house, or why they set that trap, or what they planned to do if we hadn't run. I don't think I want to. Most of my friends agree that it was a trap, and think that whoever was planning the whole thing got cold feet until the last minute. I really don't want to think about what would have happened if they had gone through with whatever they were planning on doing. When I moved into my new place, I was just looking for a fresh start. I won't get into the details, but let's just say I had a bad situation with an ex that made staying in my old city impossible. I ran into some money early in life and made some bad decisions about the kind of women I surrounded myself with. Lesson learned. The neighborhood I moved to is really nice. Low crime, quiet, mostly families. The houses here are really spaced out, which was partially what drew me there. But for some reason, the property next to mine is much closer in proximity than most of the other properties are to each other. And by the way, that house next door is huge. When I first saw it, I thought I could easily fit a family of 10. That's honestly what I assumed at first, that a big family lived there, grandparents and everything. But I could not have been more wrong. Even though I try to be low-key, I wasn't going to be a rude neighbor. I took it upon myself to introduce myself to everyone in the neighborhood. For whatever reason, I decided to introduce myself to my next-door neighbors last. I couldn't tell you why. Everyone else I met seemed really sweet and genuine. I'd say 90% of them were parents of young children. And yes, they were all slightly intimidating, purely based on how successful they seemed to be. I wasn't too sure how a younger guy like myself would easily blend into a community like that, but that was more of a personal concern. When I got around to meeting my next-door neighbor, my social battery was mostly drained from having spent the day making small talk with strangers. I knew if I just went back home, I was never going to be as motivated to meet them, so I just sucked it up and walked up their driveway. I had gotten accustomed to being greeted by someone middle-aged, so when a young-looking dude in a mullet opened the door, I was a little taken aback. Hell, he looked even younger than me, which was definitely a shock. I recovered quickly and went ahead with my new-to-the-neighborhood spiel. As I went on, he flashed me this massive smile and actually cut me off before I could even finish talking. He said something along the lines of, "Oh wow, someone who was born in my decade, what a nice surprise." I laughed and told him the same thing, venting to him about how out of place I felt as a single guy in his late 20s amongst so many families with kids. He told me not to worry about that, and that most of the people who lived here kept to themselves, which was kind of a relief for me. He introduced himself as Damon, and told me I should come by for a drink sometime. I shrugged my shoulders and said, hell, why not right now? To which I expected him to laugh and invite me in. Instead, though, he looked over his shoulder like he was scanning his living room, and then he turned back to me, saying he wished he could, but he was busy working. I asked him what he did for work, because it just seems like a normal follow-up question to what he said, and he dropped his smile a bit. After a weird stare, he laughed and just said, finance, but didn't elaborate any more than that, which I thought was a bit strange. I told him fair enough, and asked if he had any roommates. To my surprise, he told me he lived there alone, which was absolutely insane to me given how big the house was. We chit-chatted for a few more minutes, and he gave me his number before going back inside. I was excited that someone my age lived here, especially because he seemed like a really chill guy, but I couldn't get over how odd it was for someone like that to live all alone. And yeah, I know I was essentially doing the same thing, but you have to keep in mind my house wasn't even half the size of his. Anyway, I went back home and got on with my life. That was about 6 months ago. For a few weeks after that, nothing eventful really happened. I texted Damon a few days after he gave me his number to try and set something up, but he'd always complain about how busy he was and how sorry he was that we couldn't hang out. Eventually, I gave up with him. Not in a hostile way, just in a you do you kind of way. I'm definitely not the type of person to bend over backwards for someone who seems disinterested. I never saw anyone coming or going from Damon's place. No visitors, no parties, no girls, nothing. He never even got takeout delivered, which was strange to me because his car was always in the driveway. I genuinely didn't know what he ate because I literally never saw him leave the house. The guy lived like a ghost. I work from home, and the office in my house is on the 3rd floor, which overlooks Damon's property, if you're wondering how I knew so much about his living habits. I know it sounds obsessive and a little creepy, but his house was also just a glance away from my monitor, so I couldn't help but look over from time to time. One night, it was a Wednesday night, I remember that distinctly, I woke up around 2 a.m. to the sound of loud music. I sleep with my windows open, so that's probably how I woke up so easily. At first, I thought I was imagining it, or it was part of a really vivid dream I was having, but I was wrong. I got out of bed and peeked out my window, and there they were, 7 or so cars lined up in Damon's driveway. There was no mistaking it, he was having a party. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not the type to complain about some noise. I've been to my fair share of house parties, but it was the middle of the week and the volume was insane. I figured I'd just go over, knock, and ask him to turn it down. I threw on a hoodie and walked over. It was a full-blown party, that much was clear from outside. I knocked on the door, but no one answered. I pulled out my phone to text Damon, but I decided against it, knowing he'd probably ignore me and give me some BS excuse the following morning. I knocked on the door again, harder this time. Still nothing. I reached for the handle, half expecting it to be locked, but to my surprise, the door swung open. Inside, the first thing I saw was a pile of shoes in the foyer, at least 10 pairs, but there was something off. There was literally no one in there. I moved further in, expecting to see people in the living room, maybe the kitchen, but it was completely empty. There weren't even any drinks left out. I could hear people over the music that was playing in the background though, which I didn't understand. But then I really listened to it, and everything hit me all at once. It wasn't even music, really. It was a recording, a literal recording of people laughing, yelling, clinking glasses. The whole party was fake, all of it. But that didn't make sense to me. It still didn't explain the shoes or the cars. There were people in that house, that much was certain. I should have turned around right then, but I needed to know what was going on. I moved discreetly around the house until I saw a door that was slightly ajar. I gently pushed it open and it led down to the basement. I'm not sure how I knew, but something told me what I was looking for was downstairs. It was dark down those stairs, with the exception of a very faint light coming from somewhere I couldn't see. There was no reason to go down there, I knew that, but I did it anyway. I got to the bottom of the stairs and looked around. The light was coming from another door somewhere deeper in the basement. I crept towards it, and as I got closer, I started to pick up on another noise I hadn't been able to hear earlier over the music. It sounded almost mechanical. It was this heavy, rhythmic grinding, like heavy machinery or a buzzsaw or something. I got a little closer, close enough to see through the crack. There were 3 people standing in there, looking across the room at something that was out of view. They were all older-looking guys, significantly older than Damon. They were wearing heavy-duty work clothes and had on these protective goggles and thick rubber gloves. I also realized they were wearing what looked like work boots, even though I had seen all those other shoes upstairs. Under different circumstances, I would have assumed that they were construction workers. I really wanted to see what they were looking at, but it was too far out of view. After a few seconds of me just standing there, I started to pick up on this awful bleach smell, or some kind of cleaning solution. That's what did it for me. I started to feel this awful pit in my stomach, like my life was in danger. I can't explain it. I turned to leave, trying to be as quiet as possible. As I was finding my way back to the stairs, the light from behind me suddenly dimmed, like someone had shut the door behind me. I didn't actually hear the door over the music, but I felt it. I sprinted up the stairs as fast as I could. I ran through the house and burst out the front door. I didn't run directly to my house. I jumped my own fence and made it to the backyard. I slipped in through my side door, locking it behind me. My chest was pounding, but under no circumstances could I let Damon or any of those other guys know it was me who had been snooping around. I gathered myself and went up to my office, making sure all the lights up there were off. I crouched down below the window and peeked over at Damon's house. There was no one there. But then, a few minutes later, the front door flew open and like 8 guys poured out, scanning the yard, the driveway, the street, but Damon wasn't with them. I could tell because everyone looked older, like those first guys I had seen. A few of them looked like they were arguing about something, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. One of the men actually shoved one of the other ones, and I thought they were about to start fighting in the street, but they didn't. Eventually, they all went back inside, and the music stopped soon after that. I stood at the window, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I thought about calling the cops, but what would I even say? The music wasn't playing anymore, and there was no real crime I could actually report. The thing I couldn't understand was how none of my other neighbors had a problem with the loud music, especially since most of them had children. I figured if they hadn't been able to hear it and I called the police, Damon would know it was me. And the shoes, I had no idea what that was about either. The people I had seen were all wearing boots. So did they bring extra pairs of shoes just to leave in the foyer? I had too many questions and I didn't know what to do, so I just went to bed. The next morning, I woke up and looked out my bedroom window. Every single car was gone, including Damon's. I went upstairs to try and get some work done, but I couldn't concentrate and found myself looking over at Damon's house every 5 seconds. After a few hours of his car not being there, I decided to go for a walk, partly to clear my head, but mostly to take some low-key glances through his windows. Nothing though. Days passed and Damon still didn't return, or his car didn't at least. I was baffled with every passing day. I still couldn't figure out how my other neighbors had been able to sleep through all the noises that night, so I just straight up asked them. I went to a few houses and asked them if they had heard the party he had a few nights ago. No one knew what I was talking about, even after I told them which house it was coming from and how late it was. I thought I was going crazy. That was a few months ago now. The crazy thing is Damon still hasn't returned, and it's clear no one is maintaining his house, as the grass is starting to get really long, and there's an untouched pile of packages leaning against his front door. I don't know what to make of this. It could be nothing, but I feel like no one would go to such lengths to disguise what they were doing with a fake party, unless it was something illegal. But would people going to such lengths really forget something as important as locking the front door? Maybe that's what those guys had been arguing about. I really have no idea, and the fact that none of my other neighbors seemed bothered by it makes me think I'm involved in some huge conspiracy or something. I know I'm just being paranoid, but I just have so many unanswered questions. When Damon returns, if he ever does, I'm debating whether or not I should just go and straight up ask him. My name is Evan. I'm 28 years old. After my divorce, I moved to a small town named Chatham in Alabama. Apart from my parents' house, I didn't really have anywhere else to go, so I came to live in my grandfather's old house. He passed away a few years ago and left the place to us. It's about 10 minutes outside town, sitting on 10 acres surrounded by woods. It's real quiet out there. I thought I'd enjoy that. The house is old, wood floors that creak, doors that stick, the kind of place that always feels a little cold no matter how high the thermostat is. But it was free, and I didn't have a better option. The first few nights were normal. I unpacked and cleaned. I spent the evening sitting on the porch with a beer. It was peaceful. No traffic, just the wind through the trees and the occasional owl. But then the noises started. The first time I heard it was on the 7th night. I had just gotten into bed around midnight. I was almost asleep when I heard whistling outside. It wasn't a song I recognized, just a slow, broken tune, off-key. It sounded like someone walking through the woods behind the house, whistling as they went. It creeped me out, but I figured it was some hunter or drunk neighbor. The next night, it happened again. Same time, same tune, but this time it sounded closer. I got out of bed and turned on the porch light, but I didn't see anyone. I went outside with the flashlight and checked around the yard. Nothing. No tracks, no sounds of someone running off, just the whistling, fading deeper into the woods. I tried to ignore it. For a couple of nights, I just stayed in bed and tried to sleep through it, but every time, the whistling would start around 1:17 a.m. I know that sounds like a random number, but I swear it was always around 1:15 or 1:19, somewhere there. It was like clockwork. I started thinking maybe someone was messing with me on purpose, someone who knew I was out there alone. I called the sheriff's office a few days later. An old deputy, who I'll call Deputy H, came out. He'd been in the job a long time. When I told him what was happening, he got real quiet. He said word for word, "Your granddaddy used to call us about the same thing. Said someone was whistling around the property late at night, always in the spring. We never found anything. I figured he was just getting old, but now you're hearing it too." That shook me. I had no idea my grandfather dealt with this. Deputy H told me to keep the doors locked and stay inside after dark. I started doing that. Not like I wasn't already. I double-checked every window. One night I even put chairs under the doorknobs, but the whistling kept coming. Closer every night. One night I heard it behind the shed. It was louder than usual, like the person was standing right outside. I grabbed my flashlight and looked through the blinds. I didn't see anyone, but I didn't dare go outside. The next night, I heard it from the front porch, right by the door. 3 long whistles, then silence. The night after that, it came from under the floorboards, I swear to God. It was like someone was in the crawl space, whistling up through the vents. I didn't sleep at all that night. I started digging through the attic the next day, trying to find anything my grandfather left behind. I found a box of his journals. He wrote about the whistling. He said it happened every spring for over 10 years. He didn't know who it was, but he thought it was someone watching the house. He said he used to sit up with a rifle by the front door just in case. He said it only ever happened when he lived alone, after my grandmother died. I called Deputy H again. He came by and read the journal, and he looked nervous. He told me to be careful. He said, "Don't open the door if you don't know who it is." That night, I stayed up. I sat on the couch with a shotgun across my lap, a shotgun I barely knew how to load. I waited. At 1:17 a.m., the whistling started again, but this time, it didn't come from outside. It came from the hallway, inside the house. I froze. The hallway light was off. I could hear the whistling moving closer, step by step. I stood up, aimed the shotgun, and shouted, "Who's there?" The whistling stopped. I flipped the hallway light on. Nothing was there. No one. I didn't sleep again after that. It was 2 nights since then, and I hadn't heard it again. I was getting sick. I didn't know who this person was. I didn't know why they picked me or my grandfather, but it was real, and I knew it was. I don't believe in hallucinations to that degree, nor do I believe in anything paranormal. This was a real person. After that night, things went quiet for 2 days. No sounds, no movement, no sign of anything. I thought maybe it was finally over. On the 3rd night, I went to bed just after midnight. I didn't stay up this time. I left the hallway light on just in case. At exactly 1:17 a.m., I woke up to a new sound. Not whistling, knocking. Slow, paced-out knocks. 3 of them. They were coming from inside the house, from the back door. Then silence. I didn't move. I stayed in bed, listening. A minute later, I heard a new sound. A creak from the floorboard in the hallway. Then another. Someone was walking. The hallway light went out. I grabbed my shotgun, heart pounding, and stepped out of the bedroom. The hallway was dark, but at the end of it, I saw something. A person, wearing black clothes, pale face. They were standing perfectly still, just watching me. I raised the shotgun, but my hands were shaking. I tried to speak, but my mouth was dry. I raised the shotgun, but my hands were shaking. I screamed, "Don't move," with my shaky voice. I saw in the dark the person slowly start lifting their leg and turning as if they were about to run. I screamed, "Stop," and at that moment they darted out of the hallway, out of my line of sight. I heard their surprisingly heavy footsteps stomping out the front door into the dark. I ran outside and fired a shot, not into the air, but straight ahead into the darkness, low-key hoping I'd hit him in the dark. I screamed, "Don't come back." The shot hurt my ears, ricocheting off the walls of the house and the deck. I locked up the house, got to my truck, and drove into town. I slept in my truck that night. The next morning, Deputy H drove out there, and the front door to the house was unlocked again. That confirmed whoever that person was had a key to my grandfather's house. Nothing was broken or missing, but Deputy H recommended I change the locks, and he also off the record suggested I move out of that old place, because someone out in those woods hasn't taken kindly to either my grandfather or myself being in that house. I drove out to the local home improvement store and switched the locks that day, that same hour. After that, I left that house to go to my parents' house out of state for a while. I left it to my dad to eventually sell that house. Anything of sentimental value we took out, and the rest was just left in there or sold. My father, of course, left out the fact that there's some creep who's been stalking the house for apparently decades now. How they potentially got a key, who they were, why my grandfather never said anything, I don't know. It all disturbs me deeply. I personally think it was some disturbed creep living in a nearby house. I eventually moved to a more urban area. This experience left me honestly too unsettled to live in a remote location. What you're about to hear is an experience that nearly made me lose my mind. It's still something that I think about quite often, if I'm being honest, but I've been able to recover a bit in the months since it's happened. The whole story is pretty quick, so I'll get right into it. I'm a single guy in my mid-30s. I live alone with no pets in a small one-story house. The house is really modest. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a living room, kitchen, dining room, and a tiny garage. That's it. Life is fantastic. Because of my profession, I can work on my own time and don't have to answer to anyone, whether that be a girlfriend, a parent, or an employer. Freedom has always been an imperative part of my life, so I've done my best to maximize it wherever possible. I know a lot of people are different, and a lot of people might actually judge me for my quote, immature lifestyle, but everyone has different priorities and preferences, so as long as no one judges me, I won't judge them. The excess freedom is definitely tethered to its own set of drawbacks though. I've developed some bad habits that I'm sure some people would frown upon. One of them is my sleep schedule, which is god-awful. For some reason, I'm most productive at late hours of the night, so I often find myself staying up until dawn and sleeping into the afternoon. It's just how my body functions, and until I'm absolutely forced to, I don't see a reason to change anything. I was up really late one night. I'm talking past 3 a.m. late. I was sitting at my desk, getting some work done on my computer. I was in the zone, not even listening to music. Imagine yourself at peak hours. That's the kind of groove I was in. The room was dead silent, and I was alone with my thoughts, the sound of my keyboard, and my work. And then, bam, out of nowhere, the silence was interrupted by the sound of footsteps pounding down the hallway towards my bedroom, followed by 3 or 4 bangs on the bedroom door. Like deafening bangs, the type of bangs you'd expect the police trying to barge into a drug den would make. I shot up from my chair so fast I banged my knee on the desk and knocked my monitor over. I was just so shocked, it caught me completely off guard. Just imagine being in your own house at 3 a.m., alone, and complete silence just gets interrupted by banging on your door. It was, and still is, the most terrifying thing that has ever happened to me. Standing up was a pure reaction. I was completely frozen after that. I had my eyes fixated on the door, dreading the moment I knew was coming. The door bursting open and someone barging into my room. Me having to fight a complete stranger in pitch black darkness. But it never came. I didn't hear anything else, not even the sounds of footsteps retreating from the door. It was like I had imagined it, but I was 100% positive I hadn't. I don't know how long I stood there, but I physically could not force myself to move. It was like sleep paralysis, except I hadn't been dreaming. And then, finally, I heard the sounds of footsteps quickly walking back down the hall. So someone had been there. I don't know why, but hearing those footsteps again unlocked my brain. Without thinking, I grabbed an empty beer bottle off my desk, ran to the door, and started chasing after whoever had broken into my home. I didn't even try to be quiet. I screamed at the top of my lungs like a lunatic, hoping that would give me the extra adrenaline I needed. I ran through the entire house, screaming, but I never found anyone. My house isn't that big. There aren't many places someone could hide, but even after checking every room, there was no one there. All the doors and windows were locked too, which was even more confusing. My bout of confidence was completely drained after that, and I felt fear start flooding back in. I sprinted back to my room, locked the door, and called the police. In the time it took the police to arrive, I listened to my surroundings in complete silence, but never heard anything. When the police finally showed up, we searched the house together, but found nothing. One of the officers tried to convince me that whoever had been there had left, but I insisted that everything had been locked up. He told me I had probably overlooked something, and it took everything in me not to curse him out right there. I know for a fact that nothing had been unlocked, but that didn't explain how that person had gotten into and out of my house. Unless I had imagined it, but I know I didn't. For the next week, I was a psychological mess. My brain refused to accept that I had imagined something so vivid, but I couldn't conceive of a possible way that that person had gotten into and out of my house. I'm much better now, but there was a time where I had trouble sleeping, eating, working, everything. Even now, the only explanation I can think of is that I somehow didn't notice an unlocked window or door in my house. Still though, why anyone would crash through my house just to run away is a complete mystery to me. I work for a property preservation company. Basically, we handle foreclosed homes, securing them, cleaning them out, winterizing them, sometimes even boarding them up if there's been vandalism. It's not glamorous work, but it pays well, and for the most part, it's quiet. You spend a lot of time alone in houses that used to belong to people who are long gone. Sometimes it's sad, sometimes it's just boring, but every once in a while, you get a house that feels unsettling. This happened in 2020 when I was assigned to clear out a property in a rural part of upstate New York. It was one of those dying places, only one gas station, half the businesses shuttered, roads cracked and overgrown. The house itself was a small, one-story place off a dirt road, surrounded by overgrown brush and woods on 3 sides. No other homes nearby, just trees and silence. According to the file, the house had been foreclosed after the owner, an elderly woman, passed away, and no heirs had stepped forward to claim the estate. The utilities had been shut off for over a year. Our job was to catalog any remaining property, empty it out, and secure it for winter. I drove up on a Monday morning around 9 a.m. with a small box truck and all my gear. From the outside, the house looked intact. Windows closed, door locked, roof fine, just a lot of weeds and vines climbing up the porch. I had to shove the front door open because it had swollen in the frame, but once inside, everything looked pretty standard. It was dusty, stale air and faded furniture. Then my work phone rang. It startled me because I had no signal out there. I'd already checked and noticed I had no bars, but the phone buzzed anyway. There was no number on the caller ID, it just said unknown caller. I answered, and there was nothing, just a low crackling sound, like static. I said hello twice, then hung up, chalked it up to a glitch. I got to work. I always start with photos, documenting every room, every item. The living room was cluttered with old furniture, lace curtains, some framed paintings. It reminded me of my grandma's house. Heavy furniture, doilies, porcelain figures. The hallway had a smell. Not rot, more like mildew and dust, and something faintly metallic. There were 3 bedrooms. One had been stripped bare except for a sagging mattress on the floor. Another was clearly a sewing room, with thread spools everywhere and a dusty machine on the desk. I took a closer look, and there was a corkboard filled with old newspaper clippings. They were mostly obituaries. Dozens of them, all clipped out with scissors and pinned carefully to the board. No names I recognized, all local. I moved on. In the master bedroom, there was a rotary phone on the nightstand. I remember stopping and staring at it for a second because I hadn't seen one in years. It was off-white, yellowed with age, with a long coiled cord. The kind of phone that would never ring again because the line had been cut long ago. I moved on to the bathroom. That's when my phone rang again. It said unknown caller again. This time I hesitated. I picked it up, stepped out into the hallway, and answered. Again, nothing. But this time, after about 5 seconds, I heard a whisper. Very soft, so quiet I could barely make it out. It said, "Don't answer the phone in the bedroom." Then the line went dead. I stood there, frozen, heart pounding. The house was dead silent. I checked the windows, all closed. Nobody was outside, and there was no sign of forced entry. My first thought was that someone had pranked me. It's what anyone would think. Maybe one of the other crew guys was messing with me, but no one else knew I was there that early, and again, I had no signal. I checked my phone. 1 bar, then nothing, like it flickered in and out of existence. I tried calling my supervisor, but the call failed. I decided to finish the job quickly. I started boxing up loose items in the living room, books, figurines, dusty glassware, but the whole time I felt off, like I was being watched. I kept glancing toward the hallway, half expecting to see someone standing down there. Then the phone rang a 3rd time. But not my phone, the rotary phone in the bedroom. I heard it from across the house, a shrill, mechanical ring that echoed through the rooms. That phone should have been dead. The line was disconnected, no dial tone and no service, but yet it rang like an old-fashioned bell. I walked slowly down the hallway toward the bedroom, phone still in my hand. It rang again and again. I stepped into the doorway. The phone sat on the nightstand, the receiver trembling slightly with each ring. There was no chance I was picking up that phone. The rings eventually stopped. I backed out of the room. I wanted to leave, but part of my job was securing the property, and I still had to check the basement. I almost said screw it, but something made me keep going. Maybe it was pride. Maybe I just didn't want to admit how scared I was. The basement door was in the kitchen. I opened it slowly. The stairs creaked as I stepped down, flashlight in hand. I smelled mold and something like rust. There were shelves along the wall, filled with old paint cans and some broken furniture. In the back corner, there was a small table. On it, a cordless phone, a newer model. It was gray plastic and covered in dust, and next to it, a stack of yellowed notebooks. I picked one up and flipped through it. Each page had a name and a date and a short sentence. Lena H., July 3rd, 2019, rang once, didn't answer. Carl M., September 12th, 2019, picked up, warned him. It was more like this, dozens of entries. I dropped the notebook, and my heart felt like it completely dropped out of my body as I looked around the basement, fearing I wasn't alone down there and that someone was watching me from any corner in the darkness. I rushed back up the stairs, looking behind me the whole time, heart in my throat. I didn't finish the job. I drove straight back to the office and turned in my report. I didn't tell them everything. I just said the property was unsafe and possibly had squatters or interference. They reassigned the job to another crew. 2 days later, I got a text from one of the other guys, Mark. He'd gone out there that morning to finish the job. I hadn't told him specifically what happened. His message said, "The phone in the bedroom with no service rang while I was in there. What the hell?" I called his work cell phone immediately, and he told me he didn't answer the phone in the house because he was too freaked out. The next day, Mark apparently quit without notice and never returned to work. He's not dead or anything. I admittedly looked him up on Facebook eventually, and he'd posted stuff since then, but I never spoke to him again. I don't know what else he saw in the house, but it must have been something bad enough for him to want to distance himself from this job. My boss did call the police to report the potential squatters after Mark quit, but they found nobody inside of the house. Everything about that house, from its location to its eerie, dilapidated interior, to the phone calls to my cell phone, and that voice on that line, and that damn house phone ringing. It's like I found myself in a legitimate horror movie. I swear it had to be one of two things: an elaborate sick prank or an equally elaborate trap. When I was 10 years old, my family moved into a bigger house because my mom had just gotten remarried and we needed more space. The house was nice, newer than the one we lived in before, and it was in a quiet neighborhood with a lot of trees. I thought I would be happy there. At first, everything seemed normal, but then little things started happening that made me feel like the house wasn't right. My bedroom was at the end of the hall. It had 2 big windows that faced the backyard and a closet that was deeper than the one I had before. I liked it, until the first night I slept there. I woke up around midnight because I heard something moving in the closet. It wasn't loud, just soft shuffling like clothes being brushed against. I stared at the closet and told myself it was just the house settling. I know it sounds cliche, but most people, even as children, would assume small sounds coming from here and there in a house are just typical house noises that you hear every day. But then I saw the door move. It didn't swing open, but it shivered like someone had lightly pressed on it from the inside. I wanted to run to my mom's room, but I was frozen. I stayed that way until I fell back asleep, still staring at the closet. The next morning, the closet door was cracked open just a little, even though I had shut it tight. I asked my mom if she had gone in there, and she said no. She said maybe the air vents pushed it, but I knew it wasn't the air vents. The nights after that got worse. I started hearing tapping on the window glass. At first, I thought it was tree branches, but when I looked, there were no branches near the window. The tapping would go on for minutes, and when I pulled the blanket over my head, it would stop. I tried to ignore it until one night I finally peeked out. I saw a pale hand pressed against the window. It was on the outside, but the window was on the second floor, way too high for anyone to reach without a ladder. The hand stayed there for a long time, just pressed, without moving. Then it slid down slowly and disappeared. I didn't sleep at all that night. I told my mom, and she started cracking up laughing when I told her. She didn't believe me for a second. When she saw that I wasn't just saying it as a prank or a joke, she leaned more into trying to convince me that I was probably in a half-asleep state and seeing things from my dream, but I knew that was a load of horseshit. My stepdad didn't believe me either. He said I was making it up for attention, and he also got a laugh out of it. But I started noticing he kept the hallway light on at night, so maybe he didn't feel as safe as he pretended. A month later, my little brother, who was 4, started talking about the white lady. He would say she came into his room and sat on his bed. My mom thought it was just his imagination, but one night I heard him screaming. I ran in and saw him curled up under his blanket crying. When he finally calmed down, he said the white lady had been standing by his door, just staring at him. He said her eyes were all black. I believed him because of what I had seen at my window. I started sleeping with the blanket over my head every night, but that didn't stop the dreams. I began to dream of the white lady too. She would stand in the corner of my room and whisper my name. Her voice was dry, like leaves rubbing together. Sometimes I would wake up and still hear it, faint but definitely real. One night I woke up and saw her standing at the foot of my bed. She was taller than anyone I had ever seen. Her head almost touched the ceiling. She wore a long white dress that moved even though the air was still. Her hair was black and stringy, and her face was pale like chalk. Her eyes were like empty black holes. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. I shut my eyes, and when I opened them again, she was gone, but my closet door was wide open. After that, I couldn't go in my closet anymore. I begged my mom to let me sleep in her room, but she said I need to learn how to be brave. I think she didn't want to admit she was scared too. The worst night came during a storm. Heavy rain and loud wind. I woke up to the sound of my window creaking. When I looked, the window was slowly sliding open, even though it was locked. I could see the lock turning by itself. The window opened all the way, and I saw the white lady climb in. She didn't move like a person. She floated. Her feet never touched the floor. She drifted toward my bed and leaned down until her face was right in front of mine. I felt her cold breath on my skin. She whispered my name again, and this time I screamed as loud as I could. My mom and stepdad came running in, but when they turned on the light, the window was closed and locked, and no one else was there. They yelled at me for scaring everyone, but I could see in their faces that they were worried. The weird thing about that part of the story is that I don't vividly remember what happened between the moment I saw that lady floating towards me and my screaming. The best I can explain it is that I sort of blacked out for a moment before remembering screaming and having my parents rush into the room. My window was closed again, which would suggest to people that it was just a night terror. That's what my parents believed it was, I think. My mom started taking me to therapy for a while because they were worried about me. We lived in that house for 3 more years, and I never got used to it. My brother stopped talking about the white lady, but I think it was because he was too scared, not because she stopped visiting. Sometimes I would hear him crying at night and saying, "Go away." I think he just also didn't want to be forced into going to therapy. Sometimes when it storms at night, I still get scared to even get up to go to the bathroom or get water. I'll glance over at corners of the room, making sure I don't see something tall lurking there. It goes to show how these kinds of things stick with you into adulthood. I'd be more open to believing it was simply night terrors if it weren't for the fact that I saw that hand on my window before my little brother even first mentioned the white lady. I guess this is just one of those freakish experiences that cannot be explained. This happened in early December 2 years ago, when I drove up into the mountains to visit an old friend I had not seen in a long time. His fictional name for the story is Scott, and my real name is Jeremy. We had been friends since middle school, but after graduation, he moved out to a small mountain town with his family. Over the years, we slowly drifted apart. I stayed in New York City for work, and he stayed up in the mountains. We never fought or anything, we just stopped keeping up with each other's lives. So when he reached out to me out of nowhere and said I should come visit for a weekend, it made me feel kind of nostalgic and excited. He said it was the best time to come up because the snow added to the rustic rural vibe. I figured it would be fun to catch up. The drive up the mountain was extra long because I drove a bit slower due to icy conditions. There were barely any other cars on the road, and the sun went down around 4 p.m. since it was December, and by the time I reached the area where he was living, it was already pitch black. He lived in one of those older wooden houses on the side of the mountain. There were only a few scattered houses nearby, all spaced out far from each other. He lives in a good area for skiing. If only I could ski. When I pulled into his driveway and he came outside to greet me, the first thing I noticed was that something about him felt off or just different. I hadn't seen him in years, so I figured maybe I just forgot what he looked like and acted like. But the way he talked was different, slower than he used to talk, and he kept pausing between sentences like he forgot what he was saying. He helped carry my bag inside, and the inside of the house was warm but pretty empty. Not much furniture except for a couch, a table, a couple chairs, and some antique-looking wall decor. He told me I could sleep on the couch for the weekend since it folded into a pull-out bed. I told him that was fine. The house had a long, dark hallway across from the couch that led to a bathroom and 2 empty guest rooms, which he explained were empty because this used to be his grandparents' house and they recently passed away. He told me he lived alone here now. The hallway had no light at the end, and the doors were all open, so from the couch, all I could see was this pitch-black rectangle stretching into the back of the house. For some reason, it made me uncomfortable, even though there was nothing obviously scary about it. That first night, we talked a little bit about old times, but it felt strange. His general demeanor and mannerisms were more socially awkward now, but I chalked it up to the fact that living alone in the mountains for years could make anyone a bit weird. He barely made eye contact, and I did feel like he kept looking in the direction of the hallway. When it was time to sleep, he went upstairs to his bedroom, and I got the couch set up. I left a light near the hallway on because the dark made me nervous. I felt stupid about it, but the hallway really bothered me. I fell asleep, but at around 2 in the morning, I woke up to a thumping sound from upstairs. I quickly realized they were fast footsteps running across the floor above me. It sounded like someone sprinting from one end of the room to the other, then stopping and then sprinting again. The footsteps went on for about 20 seconds before just stopping completely. I waited to hear a door open or close or anything, but there was complete silence after that. I eventually fell back asleep, even though I was pretty creeped the fuck out after that. The second day was even weirder. Scott acted distracted the entire day, barely talking, barely eating, and whenever I asked if he was feeling okay, he would just nod without saying anything. I didn't understand why he was acting this way, being that he invited me here for the weekend for what I assumed was to catch up and rekindle our friendship. I also counted him going down that hallway at least 5 times throughout the day, and I never bothered to check what he was looking at. Since there was a bathroom at the end of the hall, I just presumed he was going in there, even though I never heard a flush. That night, the weather got worse, and a snowstorm rolled through. Wind slammed against the house hard enough to make the walls shake a little. It was awesome, honestly. I love the vibe of being snowed in a cozy place. I went to the couch and scrolled on my phone for like an hour, then went to sleep. Around 2 in the morning, I woke up again. This time, I heard soft scraping sounds. They were coming from downstairs, somewhere in the hallway. It sounded like something dragging across the wooden floor. Then it just stopped. But then, there was a sudden tap on the wall behind me, like someone had flicked it with their finger. I turned and looked down the hallway. I didn't leave that light on that night, so it was completely dark. I didn't want to get up. I did my best to just roll to the other side and block the noises out. Old house, I kept telling myself. I did fall back asleep, and the next thing I remember is waking up in the morning. The third night was the worst. By this time, I felt uneasy in the house in general, and I kept catching Scott staring at me for too long without saying anything, like he was checking if I noticed something. I almost thought about leaving early, but the snowstorm was supposed to last until morning. After dinner, Scott went upstairs early and I stayed up on my phone, starting to question the point of this visit entirely. Eventually, I set up the couch and laid down. I shut my eyes and tried to sleep, but sometime around 2 in the morning again, I woke up without knowing why. My eyes opened, but the rest of my body refused to move. I had heard of sleep paralysis before, but I had never experienced it. It was like being awake inside a dead body. I could only move my eyes. I couldn't even move my fingers. I started to panic, but then something made it even worse. I noticed movement at the far end of the hallway. At first, it was so dark that I couldn't tell if it was real or not, but after a few seconds, I realized what I was seeing. Scott was standing at the very end of the hallway. I could only see his outline because his face was completely hidden in the darkness. His arms hung at his sides and he was standing perfectly still, like he'd been there for a long time just watching me. It was like a scene from Paranormal Activity. I tried to speak to him, but no sound came out. I tried to move or twitch or anything, but my body stayed frozen. I didn't even feel like I was breathing, to be honest. I could only stare. He stood there for what felt like an entire minute, not moving at all. Then, without warning, he slowly turned to his right and walked into the guest room at the end of the hall. He disappeared into the darkness without a sound. My body slowly started to regain control. First my fingers, then my arms, then my ability to sit up. Once I fully snapped out of it, I sat up shaking and sweating. I kept telling myself it might have just been a dream or a hallucination, since sleep paralysis can cause that, but something in my gut said it wasn't. I whispered his name to see if he would answer. Nothing. Against everything in me, I got up and forced myself to walk down the hallway toward the room he had gone into. When I stepped inside, the room looked empty, but in the far corner by the window, someone was standing. I could see the shape of a person facing the window looking outside. I couldn't tell if it was Scott. Either way, the sight was horrifying. I slowly backed out and then ran upstairs to his bedroom. I found Scott asleep in his bed, completely knocked out. I shook him awake and he looked confused and irritated, like he had no idea why I was waking him up. When I tried to tell him what I saw, he refused to go downstairs. I begged him to believe me that someone else was in the house. He would not even look toward the stairs. He didn't say anything, but his expression changed in a way that scared me even more. He looked like he already knew what I had seen. I then asked him firmly, "Scott, who is that downstairs?" And he just looked at me and shrugged his shoulders. At that point, I decided I was done. I didn't care about the snow or the time. I ran downstairs and grabbed my bag to pack my stuff. I kept glancing toward the hallway, half expecting to see that person standing there again. Genuinely, I just wanted to teleport out of that house immediately. When I got outside, the cold air almost relieved me. I brushed snow off my car and got inside as fast as possible. As I backed out of the driveway, I made the mistake of looking up at the house one last time. In that window of the room at the end of the hallway, I saw a silhouette. Surely that same person I saw standing in that room just before. That was the last thing I ever saw of Scott's house. After that weekend, he stopped responding to texts. I threatened to call in a wellness check when I got worried that he got murdered or something, and finally he responded saying, "I'm fine." That's it though. He didn't respond to any further texts, so I stopped bothering. That was not the same Scott I knew from school. Whatever happened to him, and whoever that was in his house, it's not my problem. I'd be lying if I said it doesn't terrify the shit out of me though. I used to travel a lot for work, and most of the time I stayed in cheap but decent hotels because I didn't care about anything except having a bed and a shower. Nothing scary ever happened to me in any hotel before, so I never thought about danger or weird people. That changed during a trip I took for a training event in a small city in Pennsylvania. I checked into a regular-looking hotel that had a small lobby with old, depressing red carpet and a smell that reminded me of my grandma's house. The woman at the front desk gave me a room key and I went up to my room on the 3rd floor. The hallway was very quiet and felt a little empty in a strange way. My room was pretty normal with a small bed, a desk, and a bathroom. I threw my bag on the bed, turned on the TV, and tried to relax. I was tired from driving for hours, so after showering and watching TV for a bit, I tried to fall asleep. I woke up in the middle of the night because I heard something sliding on the floor. At first I thought it was the ice machine or some noise from the hallway. I was half asleep and did not want to get up, but then I heard the soft sliding sound again. And this time it was right by the door. I turned on the lamp and looked at the door. Something small and white was sticking out from underneath. I got up slowly and picked it up. It was a folded piece of paper. There was handwriting inside, very messy and uneven. It was only a few words, telling me that someone was watching me from somewhere inside the hotel. My heart started beating harder because I had no idea who could have written that. I didn't hear any footsteps after the note appeared, and the hallway had been dead silent. I stood in the middle of my room, feeling unsure if I should open the door or stay inside. I decided to lock the chain lock and sit on the bed with my back against the wall. I kept the lamp on so the room would not be so dark. I felt too awake to sleep now. About 20 minutes passed before I heard the sliding sound again. I stared at the bottom of the door, waiting to see what would happen. Another small piece of paper slid through slowly, like someone was gently pushing it with one finger. I walked up to it and picked it up. The second note said something even stranger. It said that person had been inside my room earlier in the day before I arrived, and they liked watching people sleep in this hotel. The handwriting looked shakier than the first note. I felt a wave of fear go through my chest, because the idea that someone had been inside my room was too real to ignore. I looked around the room, even though I knew no one was in there right now. I checked under the bed, inside the closet, and behind the shower curtain, even though I already knew it was empty. After checking everything, I sat on the bed again, trying to decide if I should call the front desk, but it was after 2 a.m., and I had this paranoid feeling that the person sending the notes might be someone who worked at the hotel. The handwriting looked strange and shaky, maybe like an older person or someone who was unstable. I tried to calm myself down, thinking maybe this was some prank, but it felt too personal. I sat still for another half hour and tried to listen for any sound. Every tiny noise made my body tense up, even the air conditioner clicking or the pipes tapping. Everything made me jump. I told myself that if a third note came, I would go straight downstairs. I would not wait any longer. I kept my eyes on the door, but forced myself to breathe slowly. After a long period of silence, I started to relax again. But then, the third note came. The sliding sound was even slower this time, like the person wanted me to hear it. I walked up to the door again. The third note said something completely different from the first two. It said the person was already inside the room with me again. I stared at the words for a long time. I looked around the room again, even though I had checked everything before. I slowly turned in a full circle, expecting to see someone in the corner or behind the curtains. I couldn't even breathe normally now. The idea of someone hiding in the room with me made my chest feel tight. I grabbed my bag and made the decision to get out immediately. I went to the door and looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty. I unlatched the chain lock and opened the door quickly. I rushed out and slammed it behind me, then ran down the hallway trying to stay quiet, but also wanting to get as far from that room as possible. When I reached the stairs, I looked back only once. At the far end of the hallway, I thought I saw a shadow move behind the corner near the last room. It looked like someone stepping back out of sight. I hurried downstairs to the front desk where a different employee was working. He looked half asleep, but when I told him what happened, he looked extremely confused. He said there were only 3 other guests on my floor, and none of them had been walking around. He offered to give me a new room or let me check out early. I decided to check out early and drive to a different hotel, even though it was after 3 a.m. Before leaving, I asked if someone could check my room to see if any windows were open or if anything was disturbed. He took me upstairs with a master key, and when we entered my room, everything looked normal. But the window lock was broken in a way that looked recent. The employee looked nervous and said maybe someone from outside had gotten in earlier. I grabbed my bag and left the moment he finished talking. I drove to a different hotel 20 minutes away and barely slept. The next morning, I called the original hotel to see if they had found anything else. They said nothing strange came up. No cameras caught anyone near my room. No other guests complained about anything. They made it seem like the whole thing was just a weird misunderstanding, but I didn't buy it. I think he was lying. Something strange was going on in that hotel. I still remember the feeling that someone was right outside my door watching me. And the worst part is I keep thinking about the third note saying the person was inside the room again. That's the part that doesn't make sense, and made me question if it was maybe a prank. But the broken window latch said otherwise. I checked everywhere. There was no one. The window latch being broken makes me think that the person might have been coming and going before I ever realized anything was happening. I never went anywhere near that hotel again. I stayed at a hotel in Virginia during a long drive to visit family because I was too tired to keep going. It was late at night, almost midnight, and the hotel looked basic but clean. The parking lot had only a few cars, and most of the building looked dark from the outside. When I walked into the lobby, the man at the front desk barely looked up. He gave me my key and I went to the third floor. Most of the lights were dim, and every door I passed had the "Do Not Disturb" sign hanging. Like no one wanted to be bothered. Definitely the type of hotel that people stay at out of necessity only. My room was at the end of the hallway. When I opened the door, the room looked fine, but a little messy in a way I couldn't explain. Like the lamp was tilted, one of the drawers to the dresser was slightly open, the blanket on the bed had a small wrinkle near the corner, as if someone sat there recently. It looked like housekeeping rushed or simply just did not care. I dropped my bag on the chair, turned on the TV, and got ready for bed. I got into bed and tried to sleep, but I kept thinking about how messy the room was when I came in. The more I thought about it, the more weird it seemed. I remembered that the front desk man didn't even mention housekeeping when he checked me in, and the whole hotel felt too empty, but I forced myself to ignore it and finally drifted off. I don't know how long I slept, but I woke up to the sound of my doorknob turning slowly. It was such a faint sound at first that I thought maybe the air conditioner made it, but then the handle clicked lightly again, like someone trying to test the lock without waking me. I stared at the door. The room was dark except for the glow from the TV, which I had forgotten to turn off. I could see the shadow of the door handle move slightly. Someone was outside trying to open it. After a few seconds, the handle stopped moving. I stayed still, waiting for another noise. Then the sound came again, but it was different. It was a small metal scraping against the lock. It sounded like someone sliding a key into the keyhole. But that didn't make sense because no one should have a key to my room besides staff. The key turned, but the door never opened. I could see a thin sliver of hallway light in the gap. The door pushed gently once, then stopped. I waited for a voice or footsteps, but there was nothing. Then the door closed softly again, like the person walked away. I stayed awake for almost an hour, listening for footsteps or any sound in the hall. When nothing happened, I convinced myself it was maybe a staff member who mixed up room numbers, and when they realized, they left. I went to relock the door, then I fell asleep again from exhaustion. Fast forward to like 2:15 a.m., and I remember that specifically. I woke again to something that at first I wasn't sure what it was. All I know is I heard the slightest rustling sounds in the room, and I knew someone was in there with me. I was scared to sit up and look, but I did. And then the rustling stopped. I noticed even in the darkness of the room, the slightest sight of a shadowy figure, barely visible in the dark, hovering over my bag in the corner of the room. I said in a panicked, shaky voice, "Who is that?" And a deep man's voice responded, "It's housekeeping. Sorry, I'll leave now." I didn't even respond. I was so shook, but I saw the black mass move from my bag to the door, and then the door opened and closed. I immediately flicked on the light and rushed to the door to put on the chain lock. I went to my bag and saw that it had clearly been gone through. I had to gather myself for a few minutes before calling the front desk. I told them someone with a key just broke into my room and was going through my stuff. The front desk person said that no housekeeping staff was currently there. I packed all my stuff and rushed to the little lobby where I called the police and demanded they check the video surveillance footage. When police arrived, that's when the desk worker agreed to show the surveillance footage, and it showed a large, scary-looking man repeatedly walking down the halls all sketchy-like, going to my door multiple times, and then finally entering my room with a key. The man at the front desk said that the man didn't work there, and he must have somehow stolen a master key from the hotel. I got my money back and immediately fled from that hotel, driving another half hour and eventually sleeping in my car. This experience somewhat permanently tainted my opinion of hotels, unfortunately. I wonder if I could have pressed charges on the hotel for negligence or endangering a guest, or anything like that really, but I never bothered. I just try to block it out now. I used to work night shifts for a small delivery company, so on my off days I would take short weekend trips alone just to get out of the house. During one of these trips, I stayed at a cheap hotel in New Jersey because it was close to a hiking trail I wanted to check out the next morning. The hotel wasn't terrible, but it had that old smell, and the hallways were too quiet, like no one else was staying there. I checked in during the early evening, and the woman at the front desk told me housekeeping had already cleaned all the rooms for the night. I didn't think about that detail until later when everything unfolded. My room was on the second floor, and the hallway light flickered when I walked to my door. I didn't pay much mind to how creepy the hotel was because I was just so tired. I wanted to eat, shower, and go to sleep. The room looked clean at first glance. The sheets were tucked in perfectly, but the pillow on the chair looked a little crooked. I fixed it without thinking and turned on the small TV. After relaxing for a bit and eating snacks, I got in the shower. When I came out, the bathroom mirror was foggy and the room felt colder than before. I brushed it off and got into bed. The room had a dark corner near the small closet, and I kept noticing it out of the corner of my eye. It made me feel like someone was standing there, even though I knew it was empty. I fell asleep eventually, but I woke up sometime after midnight because I heard a strange, soft noise. It sounded like something sliding on the carpet in the corner of the room. I opened my eyes slowly and listened. The room was dim because the curtains were thin and some light from the parking lot came through. I thought maybe I was imagining things because I was still half asleep. Then I heard a quiet breathing sound, not mine, and it was coming from near the closet. I stayed completely still because I got scared instantly. The breathing was slow, like someone trying to stay quiet but struggling. I told myself it had to be the air conditioner, but the unit was on the other side of the room, and it made a totally different sound. I didn't want to sit up because I was afraid of what I might see, but eventually I forced myself to. I slowly pushed myself up on my elbows and looked toward the closet. I couldn't see anything at first, it was just a dark corner. But then I noticed something that made my stomach twist. The closet door, which I knew I had left completely open after checking it earlier, was now slightly closed. Not fully, but enough that it looked touched. I stared at the gap and tried to listen. The breathing stopped the second I sat up, and that made me even more scared because it meant something or someone realized I was awake. I wanted to run out of the room, but I was frozen in place. After a minute of silence, I got up very slowly and walked backward toward the door while keeping my eyes on the closet. I reached for the doorknob, turned it carefully, and stepped into the hallway. The hallway was empty and felt even quieter than before. My heart was beating so fast I felt lightheaded. I went downstairs to the front desk, but no one was there. The desk phone was ringing like someone called the hotel, but no one picked up. I didn't know if I should wait or try to find someone else. I didn't want to go back upstairs alone. After a few minutes, the woman who worked the front desk finally came out of the back room looking tired. I told her someone was in my room. She looked confused and said housekeeping was gone for the night, and no one else had keys to guest rooms except for her and one older housekeeper who left hours ago. She offered to check the room with me or move to another, but she seemed so calm that it made me doubt myself a little. I asked her to come with me back to the room just to check. We went upstairs together. I expected to see the closet wide open or something messed up, but when we entered the room, everything looked normal. The closet was fully open again. The pillow on the chair was straight. Nothing seemed touched, even though I knew something had changed earlier. The woman checked behind the curtains and in the bathroom and under the bed, and she found nothing. She said maybe I had a nightmare or woke up confused, and honestly this kind of offended me, but I didn't want to argue with her because I was tired and embarrassed, so I decided to switch to another room down the hall. She gave me a different key and left me alone. I moved my stuff to the new room quickly and locked the door. I checked every corner twice before lying down again. I tried to sleep, but the fear kept my eyes open. It was only around 1 a.m. and the night felt never-ending. I kept listening for anything strange. After about an hour, I finally started drifting off when I heard something that made my entire body turn cold. It was the sound of a housekeeping cart rolling down the hallway very slowly. The squeaky wheels echoed down the hall. The problem was that it was way past housekeeping hours, and the woman at the front desk said no one else was working. I sat up in bed and listened. The cart's wheels stopped right outside my new door. I didn't move. I held my breath for a bit so I could listen. Then I heard something worse. I heard someone else breathing right outside the door, and it sounded exactly like the heavy, slow breathing I heard from inside the first room. It went on for almost a full minute. I wanted to run or call someone, but my phone was across the room on the desk and I was too scared to move. Then I heard a gentle knocking sound. Not with knuckles, but like someone pressing their palm against the door softly. They were feeling the door, not knocking. Eventually the breathing stopped and the wheels squeaked again as the cart was pushed slowly down the hallway. I got up after a few minutes and looked through the peephole, but the hallway was empty. The cart was gone too. I checked my phone and thought about calling the front desk again, but I felt like they would think I was crazy. I locked the chain on the door, pushed the chair against it, and sat awake for hours. I kept thinking about the first room and the breathing. I tried to convince myself it was just someone on my floor messing around. Early in the morning around sunrise, I finally left the room and went downstairs to check out. The woman at the desk was gone, and a man was there instead. I told him what happened, and he gave me a strange look. Then he said something that disturbs me to this day. He said they had not had a housekeeper on staff for the last week because the woman who used to work nights just stopped coming in. He explained that either he or whoever else was on front desk duty would have to clean the rooms in the meantime. He seems like there was something he was hiding from me to save face for the hotel. I asked him if the missing housekeeper had keys to the rooms, and he said yes, she did. I left immediately after and did not look back at the hotel. I kept thinking about how that woman at the desk said housekeeping had already been through all the rooms earlier that evening, even though no one had been hired for a week. I don't know if she made that up or if she actually thought the missing woman had done it, but the breathing I heard in the room and outside my door sounded too real, and the way the closet door moved on its own still makes me feel sick. I think someone had been hiding inside that room before I ever arrived. I think they were still hiding somewhere in the hotel while I slept. I work as a house person at a hotel. It's a mix of maintenance and housekeeping. My job is to mostly help the front desk, which mainly involves me fixing guests' appliances and bringing them supplies. Another one of my jobs is to keep our pool clean and stashed with towels, which is relevant to the story I'm about to share. This took place in summer of 2023. My boss hired a new front desk worker, which for privacy reasons, I'll call her Brianna. She was working the night shifts, so I had a schedule change to help her on nights. It was a Wednesday night, so for our hotel, means it was a dead night, basically no check-ins. Me and Brianna mostly just chatted for the night while we did our stuff, which led to me going to our pool. For a guest here, if you wanted to go swimming, you had to fill out a form which basically gives you all the rules, and you'll be handed a pool key. Our managers gave us employees master keys that can get you into basically anything in the hotel. I clicked the key onto the lock and the pool door unlocked, allowing me to head in. The pool has a storage room which we stash towels and also other stuff like chlorine and whatnot. I opened the storage room and grabbed towels, since I saw there was little to none on the rack. As I was bending down to grab one more towel, I heard something hit the water. I actually jumped because it startled the hell out of me, and it caused me to drop the towels. I rushed out back to the pool area and saw one of our lifesavers floating on top of the water. It was so bizarre because there was no way this lifesaver could have been in the water without having been tossed into the pool. I looked around the pool to see if someone had entered, but there was no one in here except for me. I pulled in the lifesaver out of the pool and quickly got back to putting towels out and left. I was weirded out for sure. I asked Brianna, who was at the front desk, if anyone went to the pool, and of course she said no. I didn't want to bring up the weird incident that happened since she was new and I wanted to give her a good impression of not sounding delusional. The night went on and nothing happened until around 9:30 p.m. I grabbed a maintenance slip and read what the problem was. Room 324's toilet wasn't working. I trotted my way up to room 324 and let myself in with the key. When you open the door, immediately to the right is the bathroom. If you walk straight past the bathroom, you'll find 2 beds on the right side of the room. I headed right towards the toilet and lifted the lid up to fix it. There was no one in the room since Brianna told me the guest wasn't arriving until Friday. While I was adjusting the valves and flapper inside of the toilet to see what wasn't working, I felt the temperature all of a sudden drop. I stopped what I was doing and stood there, feeling the hairs on my arms slowly raising up. What the hell? I said in my head as I looked at all the vents that could possibly be letting cold air in. Then I realized there could be no cold air. It was a summer night, a warm summer night to be specific, so what the hell could make the temperature just drop? As soon as I had this thought, I felt the air return to normal, and my hairs went back down. I checked the thermostat in the room and it read 68 degrees. This put me more on edge now, since I hadn't forgotten the pool incident. I wanted to fix the toilet and get out of here, so I went back into the bathroom and back to fixing the toilet. It felt like 2 minutes went by, because I heard the toilet start to flush again. I sighed out of relief, and watched the water in the tank rise back up. When over the sound of the water, there was an audibly loud thump coming from somewhere outside the bathroom. I froze in place, and then, that all too familiar cold feeling coming back. My heart started to race as my mind started to race at what could have made that noise. I put the lid back on top of the toilet and made my way out of the bathroom. I turned my head right to face the 2 beds and saw the room phone on the nightstand dangling. However, I wasn't paying attention to the phone dangling. I was paying attention to what I saw past the phone. In the corner of the room, right next to the bed, there was a really tall person standing still as ever. I felt myself struggling to breathe with what I was looking at. I was frozen stiff in the doorway of the bathroom. I couldn't see any features on this person. It was just this completely black figure in the dim room, like a character outline when you unlock them in a fighting game. It stood so still I couldn't hear any noise emit from it. Then, I swear to God, he, she, it, whatever, moved. I don't know which limb moved, but all I know is I saw this figure move. I practically bolted for the main door, flinging it open so fast I almost smacked myself in the face. I closed the door and rushed back down to the first floor where Brianna was at the front desk. I told her that I was punching out, and we said our farewells for the night. While driving home, I was wrapped in my head, trying to figure out what just happened to me. I connected the pool incident to the room incident. I had no idea what that thing was in my room. And yes, I say thing now because I realized that couldn't be any human I know, and how I couldn't read a single feature of it. It was enough for me to get out of there. I like to think my mind was just playing tricks on me, but I have no way of knowing for sure. Nothing weird like this has happened to me since, which I'm thankful for, because that was the scariest night of my life. My name is Mike, and this happened last year when my fiance and I bought our first starter home together. We're an Asian couple, which is relevant to the story. It was a small 2-story house in a basic suburban town in Georgia. There was nothing special about it, but to us it was supposed to be special. It was a typical quiet street, decent backyard, cheap fence, and regular-looking houses lined up next to each other. We felt lucky to even buy a house at our age, so it was a very exciting point in our lives that was quite literally robbed from us, which you'll soon hear why. The first few days were normal. We unpacked, met a few neighbors, and tried to settle in. The neighbor on our right side was a friendly older couple. The neighbor across the street waved and came across to say hi when he saw us. But the house on our left side was different. We didn't see anyone come out of it for the first few days. The curtains were always shut. The house looked clean and normal, don't get me wrong, but it was always kind of dark inside, like no one was home even though there was a car in the driveway. The only time we noticed anything was when we saw someone standing inside their front window one afternoon. My fiancée and I were carrying groceries in from the car when she whispered something to me about it. I looked over and saw a man standing behind the curtain, only half visible but totally watching us. He didn't wave. As soon as he saw us glance at him, he walked away from the window. It was weird, but we didn't think too much about it. Some people are just quiet or awkward. Over the next week, we started noticing him more often. Not outside, but inside his house. I would catch him standing in his living room window sometimes when I left for work. My fiancée told me she saw him in the upstairs window once when she was getting the mail. Every time we noticed him, he seemed to be watching us, but never in a way where he stayed long. The second we looked back, he was gone. One night, something happened that made both of us uneasy in a way we couldn't ignore. Around midnight, I was getting ready for bed when I walked past our upstairs window. Our bedroom window faced directly toward his house. When I looked, out of habit, I saw him in his upstairs window. This time he wasn't halfway hidden or standing behind a curtain. He was fully visible. He stood straight up with his face turned toward our bedroom window. I froze for a second because I wasn't sure if I was actually seeing it right, but the second he realized I saw him, he stepped back away from the window. I remember saying to my fiancée with a laugh, "Oh great, our neighbor's a creep." The next morning, the man came to our door. It was the first time we saw him outside. He knocked politely and introduced himself as Gordon. He apologized for looking like he was spying the night before. He told me he had been putting something on his window ledge and didn't mean to look into our room. He smiled the whole time, and it was a welcoming enough smile to give me a bit of relief. I'm not saying I loved the guy instantly. There was definitely something slightly off about him, but the apology was appreciated. I didn't want to be rude, so I told him it was fine. When I went back inside, I told my fiancé he seemed somewhat nice, but a little weird. We decided to forget about it. A week later, something else happened that we couldn't ignore. In the middle of the night, my fiancée shook me awake, telling me she heard someone in the yard. I was half asleep, but I got up to check the window. Gotta do what you gotta do as the man of the house. When I looked outside, I saw someone walking in our yard. Unless it was fucking Bigfoot, it was definitely a person. A full-grown man walking around like he was looking for something. My first reaction was to shout out "hey," even though I knew that wasn't the smartest thing to do. As soon as I yelled, the person walked fast toward the gate and slammed it shut behind him. Since we didn't have anything in the backyard yet besides some gardening tools, I didn't think someone was trying to steal anything, and I didn't bother to check the backyard. I did check the front windows though, and didn't see anyone. I didn't go outside because I didn't feel safe, and eventually, my fiancée and I went back to sleep, even though we felt uneasy. A few nights after that, the same thing happened again. My fiancée woke me up, telling me she heard rustling outside. This time we both heard it clearly. It sounded like someone was shimmying something. I can't say what, but best description I could give was some kind of lock. I went to the window again, and sure enough, I saw someone in the backyard. I felt my whole body tense up this time. I yelled that I was calling the cops. The person walked out of the yard and again slammed the gate the same way, but this time I saw enough of the man's face and posture to know it looked exactly like Gordon. I yelled "Gordon," but he didn't respond. He just walked away like nothing happened. This time I went outside. I checked the yard, then the sides of the house. I took a deep breath and told myself I have to confront this now. I walked over to Gordon's house and knocked. He answered within seconds, which told me he was awake the whole time. He smiled like he always did, and started laughing while telling me that it was him in the yard. He said he was chasing away kids who always jumped the fences in the neighborhood, and he caught them jumping from his backyard into our backyard. He said it happens all the time and told me I'd get used to it. He kept smiling the whole time, but something about the smile didn't feel normal. It felt like something was behind it. I saw hate in his eyes, I swear. I didn't argue with him. I just told him I understood and went back home. But deep down, I didn't believe a word he said. The next day, he came over again and invited us to come to his house for Chinese food the next night, which would be a Friday. We felt like saying yes would at least clear the awkwardness between us and we could just be cordial neighbors. We went to his house around 7 p.m. that Friday. The second we walked in, the atmosphere felt uncomfortable. Gordon seemed relatively intoxicated and got only more drunk as he kept sipping more wine. He said he ordered a bunch of Chinese food and made a little weird comment like, "I know you guys love Chinese food," then laughed. He made little passive-aggressive comments here and there. Eventually the food arrived and he paid, and we offered to help him set up the table, but he almost yelled when he said no. The whole dinner felt tense. Then, as he finished more and more wine, he started acting more differently. He started making rude comments that were less passive and more direct. He said things that made it pretty clear he didn't like that an Asian couple moved into the neighborhood. At first we tried ignoring it, hoping it would stop, but then he got louder and more angry. I mean it, he actually started getting himself angry as he talked about how this town had a history of being white. He started saying things that made both of us feel unsafe, honestly. Then he told us that it was in fact him going into our backyard those nights. He didn't deny it or try to hide it. The climax of the night was when he yelled at us that we were not welcome there and that the neighborhood wasn't for people like us. At that point, we didn't say anything. We just stood up and left. We walked back to our house as fast as we could. We didn't even talk about it until we were inside with the doors locked. We didn't know what to do except go to the other neighbors. So we walked door to door, asking them about Gordon. Some of them were shocked when we told them what happened. Others weren't surprised at all. A few people told us Gordon was a drunk whose wife left him years ago. It didn't make us feel any better because we were living next to him now. We tried to avoid him after that. We didn't look at his house, we didn't go outside unless we had to. But how long could you avoid your next door neighbor? Every night felt tense, like he could be watching us or trespassing again. Then, one night, a brick was thrown through our downstairs window. It shattered glass all over the living room. We both jumped out of bed when we heard it. When I ran downstairs, the brick was lying on the floor. No note attached or anything, just a brick. We knew it was Gordon. There was no one else it could have been, but we had no proof. We filed a police report. The police came to talk to him, but he denied everything. He acted confused and told them he had nothing to do with it. The police couldn't do anything except document the incident. We talked about putting up cameras and staying to fight it out, but honestly, we were too scared, and this was mentally exhausting already. We both felt like something worse would happen if we stayed. Not even 2 months after moving in, we started packing again. We couldn't live next to someone who hated us and had already gone into our yard at night and then thrown a brick at our house. Before we left, we filed another report explaining everything. The police said they would keep an eye on the situation, but we didn't feel protected. We moved out of that house and out of that neighborhood as fast as we could. We left behind the home we thought would be our first chapter in life together. I still think if we stayed there, you'd have eventually heard of my fiancée and I on the news having been murdered by this man. I wish it wasn't illegal to dox people. Boy, would I love to drop his address in this story. All we can do now is move on and upward from here. This story happened a couple of years ago, around late 2021. My name is Noah, and me and my fiancée Gabby, who is now my wife, had moved into a new house in a quiet suburban neighborhood. It was a nice 2-story house, perfect for our future family. The neighbors seemed friendly and welcoming as well. Most notably, the neighbors that lived to the right of us seemed the friendliest. It was a couple in their late 30s, but I wasn't really sure. The husband's name was Daniel, and his wife was named Veronica. They were very friendly and seemed like sweet people. They even baked us a red velvet cake as a little welcoming gift. The cake was really good, and we couldn't thank them enough for it. The first couple of weeks were good in the new neighborhood. It was quiet and peaceful, until we started noticing strange things with our neighbors, Daniel and Veronica. One night, around 11 p.m., I heard shouting coming from outside. I looked out my bedroom window and realized it was coming from their house, like they were arguing. I couldn't see them because the angle of the houses blocked my view. Eventually, I saw Veronica storm out to her car and leave. After that, it was quiet again. I told Gabby about it, and we just chalked it up to them getting into an argument and Veronica leaving to cool off. I was kind of concerned because they seemed like such sweet people, not the type to have heated arguments, but every couple has disagreements. We didn't think too much of it. Later on that same week, Gabby and I were coming back home. When we got out of the car, we heard yelling coming from inside their house again. They had their main door open, but the storm door was closed, so we could hear them arguing clearly. Again, it wasn't our business, so we ignored it. Then one day, I noticed Veronica's car wasn't there for a few days, but I assumed maybe she was on vacation. Daniel was still there because his car stayed parked, and I would see him go out once in a while. But then it became a week, then 2 weeks, and Veronica's car was still gone. My wife noticed too and thought maybe they got divorced or something, which would make sense due to their constant arguing. But the way she left was so sudden. One day her car was there, the next it was gone. And Daniel was acting weird. Every time we saw him, he would try to avoid us. He wouldn't wave like neighbors usually do, and the rare times I talked to him, he would talk fast and try to end the conversation as soon as possible, like he was nervous. Something was definitely up with him. After 3 weeks of Veronica being gone, I decided to go over and ask Daniel how things were. My fiancé argued against it, saying it wasn't our business and to leave it alone. But curiosity got the best of me, and I knew she was curious too, so I rang his doorbell. I knew he was home because his car was there. It took him almost 3 minutes to answer, and when he did, he looked off. He was sweating like he just ran a marathon, and he had this weird forced smile like he was hiding something. I asked him about Veronica and why I haven't seen her or her car in a while. He hesitated and said, she just went to go stay with her mom for a while out of state because she's very sick and she's looking after her. I felt like that was a lie, but I didn't question it. I might have believed him if he wasn't acting so strange. I then asked why he was sweating so much, and he said he was doing workouts upstairs. He was speaking really fast, like he was rushed or nervous, but then something happened that made my heart drop. I heard a voice scream from somewhere inside the house. I wasn't exactly sure where, but I was almost positive it was a woman's voice yelling for help. I asked what that was, and Daniel quickly said, "Oh, I'm playing a movie upstairs and forgot to pause it." That made no sense since he had just said he was working out upstairs. I just said okay and told him I would catch him later. I went back home and told Gabby everything. She was just as concerned as me and told me to call the cops. I did, and I requested to stay anonymous, even though Daniel would probably know it was me. I told the dispatcher that I heard something in my neighbor's house and wanted them to do a welfare check. Eventually, an officer pulled up. About 10 minutes later, I heard sirens and saw 5 police cars and an ambulance. Me and Gabby rushed outside. Officers were everywhere. Daniel was being taken away in handcuffs while Veronica was being rushed to the ambulance on a stretcher. We later found out Daniel and Veronica had been in an abusive relationship and things had escalated badly. Daniel kept her locked in the basement for weeks. I didn't even know they had a basement. Down there, he would assault her, rape her, abuse her, and do horrible things. He even sold her car to make it look like she wasn't home. When I heard that scream while talking to him, it turned out he stabbed her 5 times because she had made noise when he told her to be quiet while he answered the door. That explained why he was acting so strange. Unfortunately, Veronica didn't survive and passed a couple hours later. As Daniel was being escorted into a police car, he said, "I know it was you who snitched on me, and you'll regret this." I wanted to laugh it off if the situation wasn't so messed up, knowing he would be behind bars for a long time. It's crazy how you never know who people truly are behind closed doors. Daniel seemed like a friendly, normal guy, and so did Veronica. They seemed like a great couple, but obviously they had serious issues hidden underneath. Fast forward a couple nights after the incident, I woke up in the middle of the night. It was dark, and I saw the silhouette of a person. As my eyes adjusted, I saw that it was Daniel. My heart dropped. He said, "I told you you would regret this." He was holding a knife. I tried talking him down, telling him to calm down and just talk, but he didn't respond. I pressed myself against the headboard. Then, out of nowhere, he lunged at me. I screamed, and then I woke up for real. I was breathing heavily, and Gabby was beside me. She asked what was wrong, and I said it was just a bad dream. She went back to sleep, but I couldn't. The fact that I dreamed about my neighbor who murdered his wife breaking into my house to kill me chills me to this day. Most dreams fade, but this one stayed vivid, and the words he said in the dream were the exact same ones he said while being taken away in cuffs. I never told my wife about this dream. I don't know why. I guess because she might think I'm crazy or it would just stress her out. Eventually, after we got married, we moved to another part of town. It's a nice, quiet neighborhood and a great house, but the whole event traumatized us. Knowing we lived next to a murderer still haunts us. My name is Devin, and this happened 2 years ago when I was 24 and living in a duplex in Queens, New York. It was a small, old house that looked divided right down the middle. I rented the left side, and some man rented the right side. I never met him. I never even saw him. The landlord said he kept to himself and worked nights, so it didn't concern me. My bedroom was on the second floor, and the wall of my bedroom was the same wall as the neighbor's bedroom. If I pressed my ear up to the wall, I could hear faint movements on the other side sometimes, but that's to be expected in New York City. The first week that I lived there, nothing strange happened. I worked long hours, came home tired, ate something simple, and went straight to bed. I was just happy to have my own place. And then one night, things began. I was lying in bed scrolling on my phone when I heard what sounded like a man talking, but it didn't sound like a normal man's voice. It was high-pitched, like someone trying to talk in a fake voice. It was faint, and it was being spoken from the other room, but the wall was so thin that it felt like the person was standing right next to me. I couldn't understand what he was saying. It was just this weird, high voice mumbling. I tried to ignore it. Maybe he was on the phone, or maybe he was watching something on TV. Eventually, the mumbling stopped and I fell asleep. A few nights later, though, the mumbling came back. But this time it was louder, and this time it was definitely a man talking. I pressed my ear lightly to the wall and listened. It didn't sound like he was on the phone. It sounded like he was talking to himself. I didn't know whether to laugh or be slightly creeped out. To block the noise out, I put the blanket over my head. I had work early the next morning and I needed sleep. I think that was the first night I realized I did not like living there alone. 2 weeks after that, the knocks started. I was lying in bed again, half asleep, when I heard 2 taps on the wall right next to my head. It was so close that I flinched like someone was touching me. I sat up and waited a few moments in silence, and then there were 2 more identical taps on the wall from the other side. I knew for sure that it was not a house settling noise that could just easily be explained away. I rolled away from the wall and sat there shaking. I kept waiting to hear something else, but it went quiet. I wanted to knock back, but I realized that acknowledging it would likely make it worse. The next morning, I told myself it was not a big deal and that I was overreacting. Over the next week, the knocks continued. Sometimes soft, sometimes harder, always at night, and always when I was trying to sleep. One night it went on for so long that I put in headphones and turned on a loud fan. I remember lying awake thinking about how thin the wall was, how close his room was, how close he was. He could literally be lying just 2 feet away from me. It scared me more every night. But still, the knocks could have just been him sitting against the wall and accidentally banging or tapping the wall with something. But then came the night that everything changed. I'll never forget it. I was lying in bed on my side facing the wall. My eyes were closed, but I was not asleep yet. The room was dark, except for my street lamp shining through the blinds. I heard the knocks again. 3 slow ones. I kept my eyes closed and tried not to react. Then I heard that same high-pitched man's voice come through the wall. It was muffled, but not that muffled. I could hear each word clear enough. He said, "What are you doing in there?" My lungs locked up. I sat straight up in bed, shaking so hard I felt my teeth chattering. This was no longer just potential accidental taps on the wall. He was now acknowledging me directly. He said it straight through the wall. I could just tell he said it like he knew I was right next to him. I grabbed my phone and called my boyfriend. I whispered to him that I was scared out of my mind and told him exactly what happened. He told me he was coming over right away and he would stay the night with me. I stayed sitting up with the lights on until he arrived. The rest of the night, nothing happened. It was almost worse that way. It made me feel crazy, like the neighbor knew my boyfriend was there. For a few days, things were quiet. I started thinking maybe it was just some weird coincidence that the neighbor was doing something and I misheard. But then a few nights later, something happened that made me leave the house running. I still have bad dreams about it. I was asleep this time, fully asleep. I don't know what time it was when I woke up, but I woke up fast. Something snapped me awake. I sat up slightly, and then it started. The knocks on the wall, like someone drumming their fingers right beside my head. I screamed back without thinking. I shouted for whoever it was to leave me alone. I was shaking and breathing hard. I think mustering up the courage to finally yell back spiked my adrenaline. I don't know exactly what I expected next, but I will tell you, what did happen next, I never expected in a million years. There was a voice. It came from inside my room. A voice in the dark said, "Go to sleep." It was not the voice from the wall. It was deeper and closer, right there in my room. I launched off my bed screaming. For some reason, the brief moments of my running through the hallway and down the stairs was a blur, because I really just remember getting outside and running into the street screaming for help over and over. I must have looked insane. I ran barefoot onto the sidewalk. I kept looking behind me, expecting someone to be chasing me. I didn't stop screaming until a man 2 houses down came outside and stared at me like he didn't know what to do. I begged him to let me use his phone to call my boyfriend, but he said by the sound of it I needed to call the police, so I called the police instead. I waited by that man's sidewalk shaking and crying until the police arrived. When they showed up, I told them everything that happened. They asked me if I was sure that someone was in the house, and I said yes, 100% yes. They drove me back to my duplex, and 2 officers went inside. My front door was still wide open like I left it. They said there were no signs of forced entry. They asked me if I remembered unlocking the door as I ran out. I had no memory of touching the lock. I told them I didn't think I unlocked it, but I was so panicked that maybe I did. I couldn't be sure. They checked every room, every closet, under the bed, everywhere. No one was in the house. They knocked on the neighbor's door too, but he wouldn't open up. It looked like he wasn't home at all. Eventually, my boyfriend showed up and took me back to his place. I was still shaking hours later. I don't remember sleeping again the rest of the night. In the morning, I called my landlord and told him everything. I told him I needed to know who the neighbor was and if he had any history of problems or strange behavior. I also told him I wanted to break the lease immediately. At first, he pushed back. He said he needed notice and paperwork. I told him I would not step foot in that duplex alone again, and he needed to help me. It took a whole day of phone calls before he said he would let me break the lease. My boyfriend came with me every single time I went back to the duplex to move my stuff. I refused to go alone. During those days, we tried knocking on the neighbor's door multiple times, but he never answered. It was like no one lived there. But there were signs that someone did, like packages at the door and a car in the driveway, but no human response. I ended up moving back in with my parents for a while until I found a new place. I still don't know if that neighbor was actually in my room that night, or if someone got in without the police noticing, or if it was just all in my head from the stress. But that one's the least likely explanation because it's pretty clear what's real and what's in your head. My landlord told me later that the neighboring tenant eventually moved out too without saying a word. I don't know what really happened in that duplex. This happened during spring break of my junior year of college. Me and my 3 closest friends, Kevin, Ali, and Seb, decided to go car camping in Colorado. We'd been doing these trips together since freshman year, but we were all pretty broke that semester, so we went with dispersed camping instead of paying for an actual campground. I found this spot on one of those camping apps that showed free sites. It was somewhere outside of Buena Vista, tucked back on this forest service road that seemed to go on forever. The 4 of us had done enough camping together that we knew what we were doing. We got there around late afternoon and found this clearing near what looked like it used to be a creek bed. It was completely dried up, but you could tell water had run through there at some point. The area was pretty isolated. We didn't see any other campers or even tire tracks from recent visitors. It was honestly perfect for the kind of vibe we were going for. We set up our tents in a loose cluster, maybe 15 feet apart from each other. Nothing fancy about the arrangement, just wherever the ground looked level and didn't have too many rocks. I don't even remember what we did that night. Probably just drank a few of the beers we brought while playing cards. We were all pretty tired from the drive, so we called it around 11 and went to our separate tents. I remember sleeping really heavily that night, which was weird for me to begin with, but especially during a camping trip. Usually, and this is when I'm sleeping on a comfortable bed in a climate-controlled room, I wake up multiple times from being cold or needing to pee or whatever else. Point is, I'm a very light sleeper, and during a camping trip, forget it. I'm used to waking up at least 3 times. But that night, I felt completely knocked out, like I'd taken a sleeping pill or something. When I woke up the next morning, something felt off immediately. I unzipped my tent to get some fresh air, and then I just froze. I noticed it immediately. All 4 of our tents had been moved, like not ruffled or roughed up by an animal, actually moved. They were arranged in this perfect square formation around a pile of stones that definitely hadn't been there when we went to sleep. Part of me felt like I was still dreaming. That's how bizarre and borderline unbelievable the sight before me was. Each tent had been relocated maybe 20 or 30 feet from where we'd originally set them up, but that's not really what freaked me out. The stakes were still perfectly secured in the ground, and nothing inside any of the tents had been disturbed. My sleeping bag was exactly how I left it. My phone was still plugged into my portable charger, and all my other gear was in the same spot. Nothing was missing from my tent, which I checked, double-checked, and triple-checked. I thought I was going crazy. I yelled to wake up my friends. Kevin was the first one to emerge from his tent, and I didn't even have to explain the situation to him. I could see on his face that he was experiencing the same confusion I was. Ali and Seb crawled out a few seconds later, and as I watched them take a look around at the campsite, it was the exact same thing. None of us remembered anything. But then Ali mentioned that she'd had this really vivid dream about walking in a line through some kind of desert landscape while someone counted her steps out loud. And then Kevin chimed in, saying he had a dream about being in the army, marching alongside his fellow soldiers. Seb didn't remember having a dream, and neither did I. But we found it odd that both Ali and Kevin had eerily similar dreams. The vibe between the 4 of us was really weird, but hard to describe. It was almost like we were reading each other's minds. It's kind of hard to express the feeling, but it really did feel like we were more connected than we had been the night before, but in a bad way. I remember looking back and forth between them, trying to figure out what it was that I was feeling around me. The best way I can think to describe the feeling is what it would have felt like if there was a 5th person watching all of us, who was also part of all of us. We examined the campsite a little more carefully, looking for clues or anything that would help us piece together what happened. At first, Kevin suggested that maybe we had just gotten really drunk and forgot about what we did the night before, but this theory was shattered in about 5 seconds. We found these drag marks in the dirt leading from where each tent had originally been positioned to where they ended up. The weird thing was, the drag marks stopped about 10 feet short of each tent's final location, like someone had dragged them part way and then lifted and carried them the rest of the distance. The pile of stones in the center was even stranger. There were exactly 4 stones, and they were balanced on top of each other like some kind of sculpture. It actually would have been pretty were it not for the circumstances. Kevin walked over to get a closer look, and as he was leaning in to examine the top stone, he tripped and ended up knocking the whole thing over. The stones just kind of tumbled to the ground, nothing dramatic. For a second, the four of us just stood there in silence, staring at the scattered stones. And then things went from a 5 to a 10. At the exact same time, all four of us started hearing this low rumbling sound coming from somewhere in the distance. It sounded like rocks grinding against each other. Not like an earthquake or anything, more like an old stone door being pushed open. Hearing that sound kind of sent us into a panic, and we all just started packing without even discussing things. Like I said before, it felt like we were reading each other's minds, and that also applied to our feelings. I could feel my friend's fear, and I knew they could feel mine. It was really freaky, 10 times freakier than it had been not 2 minutes ago. I don't think I've ever packed up a campsite so quickly in my life. Realistically, we were out of there in under 5 minutes, but it felt like an eternity in that moment. I'm not going to harp too much on what happened. I really don't like thinking about what happened that night, and I'm worried that if I think too much about it, it'll go from being a fever dream that sort of sits in the back of my mind to something more real. That was 5 years ago now. The four of us don't really see each other anymore, but I guess that's kind of how it goes as everyone gets older. Kevin moved to Denver after graduation. Allie's in grad school in California, and I think Seb moved to Chicago with his girlfriend. We keep in touch, but we've never really talked about that night since. My name is Simon. This happened last summer when I was 23. My girlfriend Cadence and I had been planning this camping trip for months. Just the two of us, no cell service, no distractions. We'd been together for about 1.5 years at that point, and honestly, things had been getting a little stale. Not bad, just routine. We figured a weekend in the woods would be good for us. We picked a spot in the Uwharrie National Forest in North Carolina. I'd been looking at different locations online for weeks, trying to find something that wasn't too crowded but also wasn't completely isolated. The place I settled on was this campground about 3 miles down a Forest Service road. According to the reviews, it had maybe 6 or 7 sites total, and they were pretty spread out from each other. We left Friday afternoon around 3, stopped for supplies at a grocery store near the forest entrance, and made it to the campground just before sunset. The road getting there was rough, lots of potholes and loose gravel, but my truck handled it fine. When we pulled into the main clearing, I was honestly pretty satisfied with my choice. There were a few picnic tables scattered around, a couple fire rings, and the sites themselves were tucked back into the trees enough that you'd have some privacy. We drove around slowly, checking out the different spots. Most of them were empty, which was good. We passed one site that had a blue sedan parked there, but I couldn't see anyone around it. Cadence pointed to a spot at the far end of the campground, right where the road dead-ended into the forest. It had a decent clearing for the tent and was positioned so that the trees blocked the view of the other campsites. We spent the next hour setting everything up. Cadence is one of those people who's really particular about how things are arranged, so I mostly just followed her instructions. By the time we were done, it was starting to get dark. I got a fire going while Cadence made sandwiches, and for a while, everything felt exactly how it was supposed to. We were sitting there drinking beer, watching the flames, not really talking about anything important, just existing together, which I think was kind of the point. Around 10 or so, Cadence went to brush her teeth at the spigot near the picnic tables. I stayed by the fire, poking at it with a stick and finishing my beer. That's when I noticed someone standing at the edge of our site, just beyond where the light of the fire reached. I jumped a little, I'm not gonna lie, because I genuinely hadn't heard anyone walk up. The guy apologized for startling me, and said he was camped over in the blue sedan and that he just wanted to introduce himself. His name was Aiden, and he looked to be about 30. He had this really intense way of maintaining eye contact that made me a little uncomfortable, but I obviously wasn't gonna say anything. Cadence walked back toward us, and I could tell from the way her hips were swaying that she was not pleased with the interruption. Aiden noticed her, turned, and said she picked a good spot, real secluded. He mentioned he was solo camping, trying to get away from people for the weekend, which seemed kind of contradictory since he was literally standing at our campsite making conversation. And by the way, As soon as Cadence walked back, I didn't exist anymore. This guy Aiden's full attention was on my girlfriend, which wasn't exactly surprising, but weird as hell. We talked for another minute or two, and by we, I mean he talked at Cadence while she just gave him awkward reply after awkward reply, waiting for him to get the hint. Eventually, I butted in and told him we wanted to get some sleep because we were waking up early, and that got him to leave. As soon as we walked into the darkness, I noticed he didn't use a flashlight or anything, which I thought was a little odd. Cadence and I agreed about the weirdness of the whole thing and decided to try and forget about it. We stayed up for another hour or so, then put out the fire and went to bed. I don't remember falling asleep, but I do remember waking up, and the moment I woke up, I realized something was wrong. It took me all of 3 seconds to realize I had woken up to voices somewhere in the distance. It sounded like 2 people having a conversation somewhere near our campsite. I looked over and saw Cadence fast asleep, and that's when the guardian instinct in me kicked in. I didn't freeze or cower in the tent, but rather actually went out to investigate. I unzipped the tent as quietly as I could and poked my head out. The voices stopped almost immediately, like they had heard me even though I thought I was being dead silent. As quickly as I could, I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, shining it around our campsite, but whoever had been there had either already left or was further away than I initially thought. Eventually, I went back inside the tent and tried to go back to sleep. It was a public campsite after all. People stay up really late on camping trips, so I didn't think it was anything threatening. I just hoped whoever had been out there got the hint to have their 3 a.m. talk somewhere far away from where I was trying to sleep. I didn't bother mentioning it to Cadence the next morning. I didn't really see the point in stressing her out over nothing. We spent most of the day hiking, which was a lot of fun and a decent workout, honestly. As the sun started to go down, I went to grab more firewood from a pile we'd made near the truck. That's when I noticed something on the windshield. It was a napkin, folded in half and tucked under the wiper blade. I pulled it out and unfolded it, and I was shocked to discover that it was a note. A note saying, "You should move your tent." Well, I obviously wasn't going to keep that to myself, so I showed Cadence the note and told her what happened the night before. When she saw the note, she immediately asked if it was Aiden. I said, I guess so, because who else would it be? And as the two of us were discussing what to do next, obviously more than a little freaked out, as if on cue, who walks up but Aiden? He was wearing the exact same getup as the day before, and looking at him filled me with a mix of rage and fear. The rage won, and I told him he needed to stop just walking up like that, more aggressively than I probably should have. I was 100% convinced he was behind the note and the talking for the night before, and I wasn't going to let him think that he was fooling me. He said sorry in a gruff voice and said he was just checking up on us. Before I could respond, Cadence asked him why he'd need to check up on us, and actually said something that really surprised me. He told us he didn't want to freak us out, but that he was surprised to see people as young as we were at the campsite. He said that there was a bunch of weird stuff that had been known to occur around here, freaky stuff. He said he'd found deserted campsites deep in the woods, signs of people, belongings, and other weird things. I didn't really trust a word he was saying, but he said it so matter-of-factly that part of me thought he was being genuine. He went on to say that he heard people walking around his car the night before, so he was going to cut his trip short and go home before the sun set. Then he advised us to do the same. At that point, I wasn't going to argue, and it's not like Cadence wanted to stick around either, so we all started packing our stuff. It was pretty stressful, being as the sun was already almost set to begin with. I could tell Cadence was starting to freak out because her hands were shaking as she was putting stuff in the car, and I tried my best to calm her down, but I wasn't feeling great about things either. We finally finished getting everything in the car, and I started pulling out without another word. The sun was basically set at that point, and it would probably be fully dark in a few minutes. But as I was driving out, I noticed Aiden's blue sedan was still in his campsite, which I found strange. I saw Aiden crouched down near one of his tires, so I actually stopped my car. I asked him what he was doing, and he stepped back from his car to reveal a massive gash in the tire, something that was definitely done deliberately. There was no question about it. Cadence said holy f***, and I was pretty shocked to see it as well. I didn't know what to do. At first, he asked if I could give him a lift, but Cadence whispered that she wouldn't be comfortable with that, so I told him I couldn't. which led him to ask me if I would call the police for him as soon as I got service, and I told him I would. I pulled out of the campground and started down the dirt road. My headlights were on full blast. We were maybe 100 yards down the road when I glanced to my right and saw them. There were 3 figures standing in the woods, maybe 30 feet off the road. They weren't moving, and it didn't look like they were trying to hide either, almost like they wanted to be seen. I only saw them for a split second, but I was 100% sure they were people, and Cadence noticed them as well. My foot instinctively hit the brake. I don't even know why. Maybe some part of me thought I should go back and warn Aiden, or maybe I was just trying to process what I was seeing. But before I could think it through, Cadence grabbed my arm and screamed at me to drive, like a genuine scream. So I did. Cadence didn't say anything the entire way back to the main highway. As soon as I got service, I pulled over and called 911. I told them everything, and the dispatcher said they'd send someone to check on him. We never heard back from them. I wasn't really expecting to, but I had this sick feeling that something really wrong happened to Aiden, and that I was partly to blame. Cadence tried to reassure me that he was in on the whole thing, which is a possibility, but I think that's just a way to cope more than anything. Either way, this is still something I think about from time to time. So this was 2 Mays ago. I was 28 at the time, working remotely as an IT consultant out of Bozeman. The job wasn't anything special, but it paid okay, and being able to work from anywhere in the world was a huge plus for me. Unfortunately, I was going through kind of a rough patch at the time. I'd just gotten divorced about 3 months earlier, and I wasn't handling it well. Nothing I tried was working, and believe me, I tried everything. It seems a little foolish and naive looking back, but at one point I was convinced I'd spend the rest of my life in misery unless I did something drastic. Like go off the grid and spend a few weeks in the wilderness type drastic. So that's kind of what I did. Camping has always been a big part of my life, so trekking out in the wilderness all alone isn't actually as crazy as it sounds, at least for me. I'm actually a lifelong scout. Couldn't make Eagle quite in time, but the point is, I know my way around wilderness better than most. I've got my old man to thank for that. I didn't want to go anywhere where there'd be other people around though. That would have defeated the whole point. I needed to be alone, so I did what any reasonable person does at 2 a.m. when they can't sleep. I went down the internet rabbit hole. Eventually, I found this old Montana backcountry camping forum that had a bunch of posts about some unofficial sites in the Helena, Lewis, and Clark National Forest. So right then and there, I made the decision. The next morning, I planned everything out. The only person I told where I was going was my brother, and I didn't even mention the specific spot to him, just a vague description of the general area. I had a bunch of PTO saved up, so missing a week or so of work wasn't the end of the world. If I'm remembering correctly, that was a Tuesday, so it must have been a Thursday by the time I had my truck fully loaded up. I had enough supplies to last me the full week and then some. Freeze-dried meals, water purification tablets, a first aid kit, and all the other essentials. And of course, my Remington 700. I'm not a gun nut or anything, but you don't go that deep into the Montana wilderness without protection from wildlife. The drive out there was about 4 hours from Bozeman. First 3.5 were easy. Highway to county road to Forest Service road. That last bit though, what a headache. My GPS kept trying to reroute me because the service road I needed wasn't in its system. After some painful backtracking and double-checking the descriptions of some of those online posts, I found this overgrown trail that seemed to match up with what someone had written. Twice I had to stop to move branches and other debris that were blocking the path. My truck's a decent 4x4, but I was starting to worry about getting stuck. I drove along the path until it was impossible to go any further, at which point I just shut my engine. I knew I'd have to reverse out of there when the time came to leave, but I had been prepared for that, so I wasn't too concerned. As soon as I stepped out of my truck, I was pretty confident I was in the right spot. But that far into the wilderness, there's not really a right spot since everything's as remote as everything else. Either way, I was pleased. There was a clearing not too far from the cluster of trees I had parked in front of, and it looked like a perfect place to set up camp. Except there was already a tent there. I noticed it almost immediately. It was this old olive green tent that looked like it was from the 80s. My first thought was that someone else had found those coordinates, but the tent looked like it had been there for years. There was actual mold growing on the seams, like visible from 20 feet away kind of mold. I walked over out of curiosity. I probably shouldn't have, but whatever. I called out a friendly hello and waited. There was no response. The zipper was partly open, so I just unzipped it the rest of the way. And let me tell you, the smell in there was god-awful. It smelled like something had died inside. The stench was unbearable, but I was in too deep and was too curious to just walk away. I looked around the tent and saw an empty sleeping bag, some soup cans, and a little notebook. I withstood the nastiness just long enough to grab the notebook and reach my head back into the pure air. There wasn't anything else in the tent besides what I already mentioned, so I didn't see the need to keep investigating. But something was making that smell, which I didn't really understand. But anyway, after stepping out of the tent, I started flipping through this little notebook and immediately realized what it is. Pages and pages of tally marks. There must have been hundreds of them in there, all in groups of 7. The last page had 42 groups, which is over 8 months. I wasn't really spooked at that point, more so curious and kind of excited to have stumbled upon my own little mystery. But after flipping through the notebook a few times, there wasn't really much else to do. I ended up keeping it. What was I gonna do, return it? But anyway, I decided to set up my own camp on the opposite side of the clearing, a decent distance away from the tent, but close enough to keep an eye on it. I didn't like the thought of letting it out of my line of sight. As I settled into the spot and acclimated myself with my surroundings, I realized there were no signs that anyone had actually camped here before. I went for a pretty extensive hike and didn't find any old fire rings, trash, trails, footprints, anything that would even marginally suggest another human. It was a really clear night that night. I remember that distinctly because the stars were incredible out there. The drive and setup had exhausted me, so I fell asleep pretty quickly. I woke up randomly in the middle of the night. I had no idea what time it was, but I knew for a fact I didn't wake up to nothing. I'm a very heavy sleeper, even out in the wilderness, so I knew something was wrong. I froze in the dark and listened, trying to hear for an animal or whatever else could have woken me up, and after about 30 seconds, I heard it. Whispers. It sounded like 2 or 3 different voices, and if I had to guess, I'd say they were maybe 20 feet from my tent. They were having some kind of conversation, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. I was so freaked out I started sweating. When you go that deep in the wilderness to be alone, the last thing you're expecting to stumble upon is another person, let alone multiple people. It doesn't sound like the scariest thing per se, but in the moment I was terrified. I stayed frozen in my sleeping bag, pretending to be asleep. The voices stopped, but I still didn't want to move. And after a few seconds, I started hearing footsteps around my tent. I realized whoever was out there was circling my tent, the way an animal might. Instinctively, my hand went straight to my rifle, which turned out to be the correct decision because not 2 seconds later, someone started yanking on my tent zipper. When it didn't budge, thanks to the clips I'd put on, they pulled back. I had my rifle aimed directly at the tent flap, and a very strong part of me wanted to just fire right then. I was expecting the person messing with my tent to just leave, but no. They started scratching the flap like they were trying to cut their way in, and that's what sent me over the edge. I spoke up, saying I had a gun and to back the fuck off. The scratching stopped immediately. There were a few seconds of complete silence, and then I heard footsteps, multiple sets of footsteps running away in what sounded like different directions. It sounded like at least 3 people, which was somehow 10 times worse than the thought of it being just 2. They didn't all run the same way, which struck me as strange. I didn't sleep much that night, but I felt very safe with my rifle by my side. As soon as the sun rose, I unzipped my tent and stepped outside, making a big show of brandishing my rifle. I immediately looked over at where the old moldy tent had been. It was gone. I walked over to the spot where I knew it had been. There was no ground depression, no stake holes, nothing. The grass wasn't even flattened, but I knew for a fact there had been a tent there. I had stared at it for hours the previous day. What I did find were footprints, Bare human footprints all around my campsite in a rough circle about 20 feet out. There were tons of them, and they were different sizes, which confirmed to me that there had been more than just 2 people out there. Some of them were also really deep, like whoever made them had been standing there for a long time. One set of prints led over to a big pine tree at the edge of the clearing. I walked over, and that's when I saw them. Fresh cuts in the bark. I knew what they were. Tally marks. 7 groups of 7, and the start of an 8th group. Just like the notebook. I just kind of stood there, trying to make sense of it. The notebook had been counting something for over 8 months, and now there were fresh marks on this tree, right next to my campsite. I didn't want to think about what that meant. It gets much, much worse though, because as I was backing away from the tree, I noticed something else. It was and still is the most disgusting thing I've ever seen. There was a dead squirrel hanging from a low branch a few feet away, tied up with what looked like a fishing line. I'm not squeamish about dead animals, I'm a hunter for Christ's sake, but something about the way it was positioned made me want to puke. I didn't really need any more of an indication. I immediately ran back to my campsite and started packing my stuff as fast as I could. I'll admit that my hands were actually shaking while I took down my sight, and I was having trouble focusing on the task at hand without looking over my shoulder every few seconds. After what felt like forever, I finally finished packing everything and started jogging towards my truck. I threw everything in, jumped in the truck, and started backing out. Part of me thought my tires were going to be slashed or something else, but thankfully my truck was untouched. The path was narrow, and backing out was even harder than pulling in, so the ordeal was torture. It was hell, but I made it, and I don't think I was followed. By the time I made it back home, I decided I wouldn't even bother calling anyone. I did not think there was a point. Like, realistically, what would I even report? It's not like anyone would go that far into the woods to investigate. The thing that freaks me out the most is the sight of that squirrel. No one does that unless they're trying to send a message or a threat. I honestly don't know what would have happened if I stayed another night, or if I hadn't been armed. Before we start today's stories, a quick thanks to today's sponsor, ZocDoc. The horror in a lot of the stories I read start with a small, creeping sense of unease. Well, sometimes the real creeping dread comes from something we ignore, our health, like a nagging ache, a weird symptom, or just the stress of keeping up with everything. I recently found myself putting off a doctor's visit with the usual excuse that maybe it'll go away and I'll wait till tomorrow to call. That's where ZocDoc swooped in and made things simple. It's a free website where you can search and compare in-network doctors, filter by specialty, check actual appointment openings, and book instantly, often within 24 to 72 hours. You can look at verified patient reviews, read doctor profiles, and pick someone who feels like the right fit for you. No long phone calls or guessing games. For me, I was able to pick a doctor who literally had availability the next day and whose reviews mentioned patients feeling heard. That was important because when you walk into an appointment, you want someone who gets you, not someone you can't connect with. So if you've been putting off seeing a doctor, feeling unsure of where to start, or just want someone you feel good about walking into their office or video call, go check out ZocDoc.com/Mr. Nightmare and find a doctor that fits you. This happened to me on Thanksgiving Day 2 years ago. The reason I remember it was Thanksgiving Day was because I was sick with a respiratory virus that was going around at the time. On Thanksgiving, I was past the fever and contagious part. I just had body chills and could not go 5 seconds without coughing, and I could barely speak. At the time, I had promised a friend/coworker who would be out of town for the holidays that I would watch her cat, as her cat is older and needs medicine every day. I agreed since she lives a short walk away from where we work. I agreed before I got sick, but I couldn't go back on my promise. I was also talking to a friend about how both of us wanted to go play tennis and bowling at some point since we both played in high school. I had kept my tennis rackets and bowling ball at my father's place since the dorm I lived in was extremely small. I live in a big city to go to college and therefore did not have a car as I used public transportation to get around. Because I was sick during Thanksgiving, I was unable to get back to my father's place for Thanksgiving. But I was extremely determined to get my tennis rackets and bowling balls since I only go back to my father's place a couple times a year. So if I didn't get my things on Thanksgiving, it would be another few months before we could play, and so I was stubborn and dead set on getting my things. I had made a plan in my head. I would walk to the light rail and get off on a station closer to where my father lives, then ask my brother to come and bring me the stuff that I wanted. On the way home, I would get off the light rail and take the bus to my friend's place to check in on her cat and make sure she was taking her medicine. The transit system where I live is still very irregular. As I was waiting for the bus to come and take me to my friend's place on Apple Maps, my phone would keep saying that the bus was 1 minute away just for it to not show up, and then I'd refresh it and it would say the next bus comes in 15 minutes. I would have just walked to her place and she lives not too far from the light rail station. But for context, at the time I was a 19-year-old female, about 5'3", and I was carrying a 13-pound bowling ball, a couple tennis rackets, and some Thanksgiving leftovers, along with being sick. I had been waiting for over 30 minutes for the bus to come, and since it was about 9 p.m. on Thanksgiving, the bus stop was empty and I was the only one there. As I was waiting, a car pulled up with a group of men who looked like they were in their early to mid-20s. They were speaking another language and laughing. I assumed they were just friends dropping someone off at the station. After a few minutes, one of the men got out and the car drove off. The station was pretty big, and I stood a little away from the actual bus stop since I was coughing a lot and didn't want to be near anyone. Despite that, the man walked over and sat on the bench directly next to me. I didn't think much of it at first. I just stared at my phone, watching the bus arrival time constantly change, and kept leaning out to look down the street for the bus headlights. A couple minutes passed, and then I suddenly felt something on my shoulder. The man had gotten up and wrapped his arm tightly around me. My mind went completely blank. I was so confused and startled that I just froze up. After a moment, he mumbled something, like asking if I was okay. I quietly said that I was fine and just waiting for the bus. A couple minutes later, he let go and sat back down. Red flags were going off, but I kept trying to rationalize it. Maybe he heard me coughing and thought I didn't feel well, or maybe he saw me leaning out to look for the bus and thought something was wrong. I knew those excuses were stupid, but I was trying to keep myself calm. People might be wondering why I didn't run or yell, but this man was well over 6 feet tall and easily twice my weight. He was also wearing one of those bandana-style face coverings. It was odd, but this was near the end of COVID, so some people still wore them. And we were completely alone at the bus stop. I didn't want to provoke him. A few minutes later, he got up again and put his arm around me a second time, sometimes even stroking my back. Luckily, I was wearing a thick puffer jacket. I saw my bus approaching and just stayed still, thinking everything would be over once I got on. When the bus got close, I slipped out of his grip and quietly said something like, "My bus is here." He said something in response that made it clear he planned to follow me onto the bus. I know I should have told the driver, but I could barely talk without coughing, and nothing like this has ever happened to me before, so I was panicking. When I got on the bus, I stood up on purpose. Because of his size, I knew he'd have to sit, and if I sat first, he would sit next to me. Once he wasn't looming over me, I messaged a friend and tried to figure out what to do. I considered calling the police, but knew he would hear me, and I didn't know if he had a weapon. While I was stuck under his grip earlier, I was already planning what to do if he followed me. I knew I couldn't go to my friend's place. I also couldn't shake the thought that the group of men who dropped him off might be involved in something with him. The stop before my friend's place was the stop for work. I worked at a restaurant inside a large outdoor shopping center. It was around 9:30 p.m. Even though all the stores closed at 9, I knew the entire center had security and cameras everywhere. I also knew my coworkers would still be there finishing closing duties. The only downside was the locked front door, but the back employee entrance would be open. To get in through the back, I'd need to go through the outdoor trash room enclosure first, then punch in the code on the door. When the bus reached my stop, the man got off right with me and immediately grabbed my shoulder again, gripping even tighter. I had to take tiny steps. I didn't want to suddenly sprint and alert him if I wasn't close enough to make it inside in time. As we got closer to work, all I could think about was whether I'd be fast enough to break away and get through both doors before he caught me. Thankfully, when he approached the back entrance, the door to the trash enclosure was propped open, and one of the chefs and a coworker were standing there talking with the back door held open. I used that moment. His grip had released just slightly from walking, and I slipped out of it and ran past him. I tried to tell my coworker that a man was following me and to shut the door. Even though I could barely talk, he closed it right away. Not even 2 seconds later, the handle started rattling violently, and he started banging on the door. I explained as best I could that I didn't know him and that he followed me from the bus stop. We called mall security. While we waited, we could see the man pacing around the restaurant through the windows. After a couple of minutes, he walked into the ice cream shop directly across from us. Security arrived and asked me a few questions. The coworker who had been at the door ended up driving me to my friend's place so I could check on her cat, and then she drove me home. A few days later, my manager told me that mall security wanted to know if I wanted to press charges. I said I wasn't sure yet, and that I mostly wanted to know the man's name and what he claimed he was doing there, but my manager never followed up, and I never heard anything again. To this day, I have no idea what that man wanted, though I definitely have my suspicions. I honestly forgot about the whole thing until recently, when my same friend asked me again if I could watch her cat for Thanksgiving. That's what brought all of this back. This happened in early December 2 years ago, when I drove up into the mountains to visit an old friend I had not seen in a long time. His fictional name for the story is Scott, and my real name is Jeremy. We had been friends since middle school, but after graduation, he moved out to a small mountain town with his family. Over the years, we slowly drifted apart. I stayed in New York City for work, and he stayed up in the mountains. We never fought or anything, we just stopped keeping up with each other's lives. So when he reached out to me out of nowhere and said I should come visit for a weekend, it made me feel kind of nostalgic and excited. He said it was the best time to come up because the snow added to the rustic rural vibe. I figured it would be fun to catch up. The drive up the mountain was extra long because I drove a bit slower due to icy conditions. There were barely any other cars on the road, and the sun went down around 4 p.m. since it was December, and by the time I reached the area where he was living, it was already pitch black. He lived in one of those older wooden houses on the side of the mountain. There were only a few scattered houses nearby, all spaced out far from each other. He lives in a good area for skiing. If only I could ski. When I pulled into his driveway and he came outside to greet me, the first thing I noticed was that something about him felt off or just different. I hadn't seen him in years, so I figured maybe I just forgot what he looked like and acted like. But the way he talked was different. Slower than he used to talk, and he kept pausing between sentences like he forgot what he was saying. He helped carry my bag inside, and the inside of the house was warm but pretty empty. Not much furniture except for a couch, a table, a couple chairs, and some antique-looking wall decor. He told me I could sleep on the couch for the weekend since it folded into a pull-out bed. I told him that was fine. The house had a long, dark hallway across from the couch that led to a bathroom and 2 empty guest rooms, which he explained were empty because this used to be his grandparents' house and they recently passed away. He told me he lived alone here now. The hallway had no light at the end and the doors were all open, so from the couch, all I could see was this pitch-black rectangle stretching into the back of the house. For some reason, it made me uncomfortable, even though there was nothing obviously scary about it. That first night, we talked a little bit about old times, but it felt strange. His general demeanor and mannerisms were more socially awkward now, but I chalked it up to the fact that living alone in the mountains for years could make anyone a bit weird. He barely made eye contact, and I did feel like he kept looking in the direction of the hallway. When it was time to sleep, he went upstairs to his bedroom, and I got the couch set up. I left a light near the hallway on because the dark made me nervous. I felt stupid about it, but the hallway really bothered me. I fell asleep, but at around 2 in the morning, I woke up to a thumping sound from upstairs. I quickly realized they were fast footsteps running across the floor above me. It sounded like someone sprinting from one end of the room to the other, then stopping and then sprinting again. The footsteps went on for about 20 seconds before just stopping completely. I waited to hear a door open or close or anything, but there was complete silence after that. I eventually fell back asleep, even though I was pretty creeped the fuck out after that. The second day was even weirder. Scott acted distracted the entire day, barely talking, barely eating, and whenever I asked if he was feeling okay, he would just nod without saying anything. I didn't understand why he was acting this way, being that he invited me here for the weekend for what I assumed was to catch up and rekindle our friendship. I also counted him going down that hallway at least 5 times throughout the day, and I never bothered to check what he was looking at. Since there was a bathroom at the end of the hall, I just presumed he was going in there, even though I never heard a flush. That night, the weather got worse, and a snowstorm rolled through. Wind slammed against the house hard enough to make the walls shake a little. It was awesome, honestly. I love the vibe of being snowed in a cozy place. I went to the couch and scrolled on my phone for like an hour, then went to sleep. Around 2 in the morning, I woke up again. This time, I heard soft scraping sounds. They were coming from downstairs, somewhere in the hallway. It sounded like something dragging across the wooden floor. Then it just stopped. But then, there was a sudden tap on the wall behind me, like someone had flicked it with their finger. I turned and looked down the hallway. I didn't leave that light on that night, so it was completely dark. I didn't want to get up. I did my best to just roll to the other side and block the noises out. Old house, I kept telling myself. I did fall back asleep, and the next thing I remember is waking up in the morning. The third night was the worst. By this time, I felt uneasy in the house in general, and I kept catching Scott staring at me for too long without saying anything, like he was checking if I noticed something. I almost thought about leaving early, but the snowstorm was supposed to last until morning. After dinner, Scott went upstairs early and I stayed up on my phone, starting to question the point of this visit entirely. Eventually, I set up the couch and laid down. I shut my eyes and tried to sleep, but sometime around 2 in the morning again, I woke up without knowing why. My eyes opened, but the rest of my body refused to move. I had heard of sleep paralysis before, but I had never experienced it. It was like being awake inside a dead body. I could only move my eyes. I couldn't even move my fingers. I started to panic, but then something made it even worse. I noticed movement at the far end of the hallway. At first, it was so dark that I couldn't tell if it was real or not, but after a few seconds, I realized what I was seeing. Scott was standing at the very end of the hallway. I could only see his outline because his face was completely hidden in the darkness. His arms hung at his sides and he was standing perfectly still, like he'd been there for a long time just watching me. It was like a scene from Paranormal Activity. I tried to speak to him, but no sound came out. I tried to move or twitch or anything, but my body stayed frozen. I didn't even feel like I was breathing, to be honest. I could only stare. He stood there for what felt like an entire minute, not moving at all. Then, without warning, he slowly turned to his right and walked into the guest room at the end of the hall. He disappeared into the darkness without a sound. My body slowly started to regain control. First my fingers, then my arms, then my ability to sit up. Once I fully snapped out of it, I sat up shaking and sweating. I kept telling myself it might have just been a dream or a hallucination, since sleep paralysis can cause that, but something in my gut said it wasn't. I whispered his name to see if he would answer. Nothing. Against everything in me, I got up and forced myself to walk down the hallway toward the room he had gone into. When I stepped inside, the room looked empty, but in the far corner by the window, someone was standing. I could see the shape of a person facing the window looking outside. I couldn't tell if it was Scott. Either way, the sight was horrifying. I slowly backed out and then ran upstairs to his bedroom. I found Scott asleep in his bed, completely knocked out. I shook him awake and he looked confused and irritated, like he had no idea why I was waking him up. When I tried to tell him what I saw, he refused to go downstairs. I begged him to believe me that someone else was in the house. He would not even look toward the stairs. He didn't say anything, but his expression changed in a way that scared me even more. He looked like he already knew what I had seen. I then asked him firmly, "Scott, who is that downstairs?" And he just looked at me and shrugged his shoulders. At that point, I decided I was done. I didn't care about the snow or the time. I ran downstairs and grabbed my bag to pack my stuff. I kept glancing toward the hallway, half expecting to see that person standing there again. Genuinely, I just wanted to teleport out of that house immediately. When I got outside, the cold air almost relieved me. I brushed snow off my car and got inside as fast as possible. As I backed out of the driveway, I made the mistake of looking up at the house one last time. In that window of the room at the end of the hallway, I saw a silhouette. Surely that same person I saw standing in that room just before. That was the last thing I ever saw of Scott's house. After that weekend, he stopped responding to texts. I threatened to call in a wellness check when I got worried that he got murdered or something, and finally he responded saying, "I'm fine." That's it though. He didn't respond to any further texts, so I stopped bothering. That was not the same Scott I knew from school. Whatever happened to him, and whoever that was in his house, it's not my problem. I'd be lying if I said it doesn't terrify the shit out of me though.